Guten Tag, mein Name ist Marie-Gervais Wedriker, ich bin die Botschafterin von Kanada. Herzlich willkommen. I hope that our colleagues in Toronto can see us. I would like to acknowledge their presence wherever they are. We cannot see you on the screen, but we hope you can at least hear me. I would like to wish a warm welcome to His Excellency Ambassador of Nantes, dear Werner. I cannot see you, but please accept my warm greetings. Dr. Matthias Mück, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren. Es freut mich sehr, Sie heute in der Botschaft von Kanada zum German-Canadian Concourse des Jahres 2015 begrüßen zu dürfen. C'est évidemment toujours un grand plaisir pour moi que d'être la marraine d'un événement qui utilise une approche aussi novatrice. As you know, at this point I assume all of you know, we have a brand new government in Canada. And although it's still early days, because the government was sworn in on the 4th of November, so that's still very recent, we already know that they have a number of priorities, one of which is the importance that the new government wants to give to science and scientists. And I think that's very welcome by that community and by all of us. This year's topic is particularly suited to the GCC tradition of uniting people who are geographically far apart. It is also fitting that our meeting today falls during Germany's Gründerwoche and Canada's Digital Health Week, entitled How E-Healthy Are Canada and Germany, Taking the Pulse of Initiatives, Technologies, and Business in Electronic Healthcare. This year's symposium brings together a network of professionals from Germany and Canada to discuss their achievements and challenges, both real and potential, in setting up a digital environment in their healthcare systems. Canada and Germany already enjoy an excellent relationship in many areas that tie countries together. Canada is proud of the remarkable partnerships that have been built in health, education, science, and innovation. Medical institutions, the private sector, and government organizations all play an important role in developing the potential of digital health. In this context, I would like to recognize the relationships between the Canada Meets Germany network and McCarthy-Tétrault, the Hospital for Sick Children, and the Center for Global E-Health Innovation. I also want to recognize that companies in Germany and Canada are driving development in the digital health sector. Our two countries are both world leaders in healthcare innovation, and we have a lot to learn from each other. Our trade team at the embassy can provide you with assistance if you represent a Canadian company looking to come to Germany. Equally, German companies looking for Canadian partners should not hesitate to approach my colleagues, Jason Tollen and Chris Bigley, who are here in the audience. Jason is at the back. Ladies and gentlemen, what we are discussing today is no less than a great metamorphosis in healthcare, whose promise in many areas is already being realized. For example, in Canada, delivering healthcare to rural, northern, and remote First Nations communities across our vast territory remains, of course, a big challenge, and it's a long-standing challenge. However, with the introduction of telemedicine, patients can now consult healthcare professionals and specialists regularly without the huge expense and disruption of travel. Since 2010 alone, in Canada, we have seen the number of telemedicine sessions triple to almost 500,000 a year. This is not just a good news story about money saved, and that's good enough. It is also the story of people being able to remain in their communities while retaining access to quality healthcare, and that's very important. Digital health also helps societies address demographic shifts occurring alongside technological ones. In Canada and Germany, we are blessed with the fact that we are living longer lives. Digital health is a major tool in our toolbox toward mitigating rising healthcare costs associated with an aging population. Continuing to innovate and to form new partnerships across borders will be essential as we begin to take full advantage of the potential of this exciting sector. As you know, Canada and the European Union are working together on an ambitious trade liberalization agreement, the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA for short. As I said, excellent cooperation already exists between Germany and Canada at all levels in many commercial areas. The free trade agreement between Canada and the EU will also catalyze future growth in the highly important digital health sector. And your discussions today will support the development of our transatlantic partnership in the service of healthcare. I wish you a very good session, and I thank you for your attention. Vielen Dank.
May we now ask the German ambassador for his introduction. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, and good morning to the audience here in Toronto, and good afternoon to Berlin.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Hello? Could you please go behind the table? Wir sehen Sie hier nicht. Wenn Sie hinter den Tisch gehen, dann sehen wir Sie.
Hinter den Tisch? This one?
Da, wo die Stühle stehen. Ja, Matthias, das ist besser. Jetzt sehen wir Sie. Vielen Dank.
Great. So we can't see you, but hopefully you can see us. And it's a great pleasure for me, of course, to be here today at this important event. I think I cannot talk these days about our bilateral relationship and important topic of e-health without beginning to mention that all, of course, were so much shocked by the attacks in Paris, and that is dominating much any conference. This is
Could you, I'm sorry, Entschuldigung, hier ist nochmal Berlin. Sie müssen noch ein Mikrofon nehmen. Es tut mir leid, dass Sie unser erster Sprecher zum Ausprobieren sind, aber wir brauchen ein Mikrofon, sonst hören wir Sie nicht.
Okay. So you didn't hear me? Did you? No? Hallo? Hallo?
Gut, Herr Botschafter, wir sehen Sie und wir hören Sie jetzt. Vielen Dank und danke für Ihre Geduld.
Gut, jetzt haben Sie aber nicht gehört, was ich zuvor gesagt habe. You didn't hear what I said?
Not really.
Not really. Okay, I was simply mentioning the challenge we are confronted with, and that became so obvious in the attacks in Paris. But it's not only France, it's of course us, the civilized world that is threatened by these terrorists, and that is also high on our bilateral agenda, because Germany and Canada are among the allies that try to cope with this. And the other one, I mean, you are in Berlin, of course you are very well aware of what is happening in Europe, in Germany, when it comes to the refugee, so-called refugee crisis. Again, this is something we are dealing with together, and it's very much welcomed, of course, that the Canadian government also tries to take a share in accommodating refugees from Syria. Well, one thing is very important, that we don't mix this up. The refugees are not terrorists, as some people try to suggest, but these are people that deserve our support, and we welcome them. I think that's necessary to say again and again. Well, coming to recent developments in Canada, of course, with the elections and the new government, that has really made an impact on the global stage also. When you saw the pictures yesterday from Manila, from the IPEC summit meeting, how much the new Prime Minister was welcomed, that is, of course, creating a lot of hope. The relations between our two countries are excellent. They have been excellent for a long time. They are excellent in almost all fields of cooperation, from the economy, political relations, but also culture, and definitely research, science and technology. And here we are with today's event. Of course, the health sector is a very important one, and I'm very glad that this issue was, or this topic was chosen for this year's concourse here. So I think it's a very relevant topic, as I said, of enormous relevance to the technical, legal, economic and social developments on both sides of the Atlantic. A few months ago, as many of you are aware, of course, the German government set in motion an e-health law, which is an important boost to pioneering efforts in the e-health sector. And this law was very much inspired by experiences made with e-health in Canada. Sorry, this is now without a proper podium. In September last year, as also many of you will remember, the Health Committee of the German Parliament, the Bundestag, visited Toronto, Ottawa and Vancouver to gather information on e-health and medical services in remote and rural areas. Though Germany is much smaller, as we are all aware, in size than Canada, e-health services will become more and more important, particularly in rural areas. And with an aging society, with a demographic development, which is a big challenge for any political system, we will see this sector growing. In Germany, we are facing these challenges, and we really cooperate and will continue to cooperate with Canada in this regard. Digitalization, provided that strictest data protection is ensured, can help to improve the quality and efficiency of healthcare. Early in December, the German-Canadian Bilateral Commission, coming December in a few weeks' time, on science and technology will meet in Ottawa for the 23rd time. Among the core issues to be discussed at this meeting are health and information and communication technologies. Many scientific institutions on both sides of the Atlantic are already pursuing joint research projects in the field of health and ICT. I'm convinced that there are vast opportunities to deepen our cooperation on e-health, which we can build on existing partnerships. Besides its growing political importance in Germany, e-health has already become an important part of people's daily life. The rapidly growing number of apps on electronic devices, for example, indicates the current public interest in electronic health solutions in general. E-health is a subject with tremendous potential for both countries and even greater benefit in joint collaboration. I wish all participants a spirited exchange of ideas, lively discussions and enriching encounters. Thank you very much. Did you get the message? Did you hear me?
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. We hear you, and apologies for the technical startup. I'm really happy concerning the topic of our today's conference that this was not our open heart surgery, but just a welcoming. I would like to ask now Matthias to welcome us from Toronto, and please go behind the table so that we can really see you here in Berlin. That's working too. Aha.
So we figured out in the meantime how to move the camera. So my apologies that we only tried this for my presentation.
Now we see you perfectly well.
Okay, very good. You can hear me as well?
Yeah, get closer to the microphone, please.
Okay. Good, that should do, I hope, or take it in my hand. Okay, let's start. Madame l'ambassadrice Gervais-Vitricaire, sehr geehrter Herr Botschafter Fnent, on behalf of the Canada Meets Germany Network and the organizers of the German-Canadian Concourse, I would like to thank you for your welcome remarks and your very friendly introduction. And I also would like to apologize for this bumpy start. This is our fourth German-Canadian Concourse. One could think it's the first one with these technical issues, but since we have each time a different partner here in Canada, so we basically have firsts every year. Yeah, as I said, today's event is the fourth installment of the German-Canadian Concourse, which has been grown into a transatlantic forum to explore the current trends in Canada and Germany. And the growing success of the concourse is to a great deal owed to your significant support, Ambassador Gervais-Vitricaire and Ambassador Fnent, since you have been patrons for this program for quite a long time. We're grateful for your commitment to the concourse, which has been strengthening our brand. The Embassy of Canada, our partner from the very beginning, has helped to establish a home base for the German-Canadian Concourse at Canada House, the premises of the Canadian Embassy in Berlin, with substantial investment in terms of funding, programmatic advice, technical and logistic support. The Embassy and Consulates of Germany, in turn, have actively supported the expansion of the GCC across the Atlantic and provided funding, with the result that the German-Canadian Concourse today operates with 2 full-grown hubs. In this context, I also would like to acknowledge the contribution of Consul General Walter Stechel for the GCC. Welcome back to the German-Canadian Concourse, Mr. Stechel. So Toronto is now joining officially the GCC 2015, while the Berlin session already had their field trip and had a head start. So let's get started with the Transatlantic Symposium. Dear participants in Toronto, sehr geehrte Teilnehmer in Berlin, chers participants suivants sur l'internet par livestream. Welcome to the 2015 German-Canadian Concourse, which aims at answering the question, how e-healthy are Canada and Germany? Je vous souhaite la bienvenue de notre part à la conférence sur le sujet les initiatives, les technologies et les aspects économiques de la télésanté au Canada et en Allemagne. Nous sommes très contents de voir un tel intérêt dans cet événement parmi les secteurs concernés différents, autant à Toronto qu'à Berlin. The digitalization of healthcare is one of the hot topics receiving considerable attention by the German and Canadian society. The selection of e-health as a theme for this year's GCC has not come by chance, but it reflects the recent political initiatives in this field. For instance, the German federal government has introduced a few months ago the e-Health Act, which is currently being debated at the Deutsche Bundestag, a discussion likely to be stimulated by an exchange of ideas during a delegation visit of the Deutsche Parlamentariergruppe Gesundheitsausschuss to Canada in fall 2014. For sake of comparison, the concourse will also shed light on Canadian provincial legislation setting the regulatory framework for electronic healthcare programs. An efficient national health IT concept requires an orchestrated approach in defining standards and regulations. The concourse will therefore present federal and provincial key players in defining and implementing the e-health infrastructure. Telemedicine and e-health promise improvements for safer and more effective treatment, provision of healthcare to remote places, a better promotion of health for the general public, and not to be ignored, a reduction in cost. However, besides the political will to further the digitalization in the health system, technological developments and business models in distributing electronic healthcare solutions are playing a crucial part in rolling out an e-health strategy. Hence, our event will introduce you to leading centers for research and innovation in Canada and Germany with a focus on e-health. During the field trips, the implementation of telemedicine and e-health will be, or in the case of Berlin has been, illustrated in different clinical setups. The GCC will showcase emerging companies offering e-health services and startup incubation environments for medical IT systems. Der German-Canadian-Konkurs wird einen Querschnitt durch die vielen Aspekte des Thema E-Health präsentieren. Ich lade Sie nun ein, mit unseren Gästen, mit unseren Rednern und Podiumsteilnehmern aktiv diese vielen Aspekte dieses Themas zu diskutieren. Before closing, I would like to thank McCarthy Tétrault for not only being a part of on our program, but also for hosting and later generously catering the Transatlantic Symposium here in Toronto. Further, I would like to thank Charité Hospital in Berlin, the Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto, and the Center for Global eHealth Innovation in Toronto as well, for cooperating with the German-Canadian Concourse on the field trip program. The Hertie Foundation in Berlin is inviting the concourse participants to a networking reception following the Transatlantic Symposium. This in-kind sponsorship is very much appreciated. And last but not least, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all our speakers and panelists who will contribute to the program. It is now my pleasure to hand over to Mr. Alexander Tamm in Berlin. Alexander is a managing director at the Kreuzberger Kinderstiftung, and he is a seasoned moderator of the German-Canadian Concourse program. And I trust that he will involve you into a very vivid discussion of the topic. Alexander, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias. And once again, hello to everybody in Toronto, and hello everybody here. After all these introductions, I just want to give you a short introduction what we will do today and what this learning experience for all of us will mean. But before we start, I just want to have a short survey of the audience here in Berlin, and perhaps you can do that also in Toronto. It's always good to know who you're sitting with. So I would like to ask you, who of you is actively involved into the German or Canadian health sector? Okay, right. So we have about 10 hands up here in Berlin. And who would consider himself a total newbie to the topic of e-health, just like I was 2 weeks ago? All right, so another 10 hands. So we have to be very explanatory so that everybody understands what we talk about. And lastly, who of you is already using tools of e-health down on his smartphone or back in home because he might have diabetes, anything like that, from fitness app to a real health tool? Anybody? By far more, about 15 here. All right.
About
so
5 here. About 5 hands up here in Toronto.
All right, that was Tony. Tony, was that you?
Yeah, we had 5 hands up here for your question.
Okay, the voice you were hearing here in Berlin, that's Tony, Anthony Sieber. He will assist me with the moderation over in Toronto. Hello to everybody there. And before we start now the first presentations, and just some remarks how we will spend the afternoon. This is a learning experience. So I hope we will all have learned a lot about e-health, but especially a lot about our two countries at the end of the day, and understand better how things work. So please try to explain and don't get too much into details of your work, because there might always be someone who doesn't understand what you're talking about. And if you don't understand, just ask. There will be plenty of room for questions from the audience here in Berlin and also in Toronto. In Toronto, just give a sign to Tony and he will make your voice heard. We have 2 sessions. The first one will be now about the technical implications of e-health, so that we actually have an impression of what we are talking about, while the second session will go more into the political issues and the regulations. Each session is about 1 hour 30, and there's a coffee break in between, and at the end, which will be around 7 o'clock here in Berlin and 1 p.m. in Toronto, we will have our receptions and enjoy an evening or a nice lunch before you then start your excursions in Toronto. So far about the technical implications of today. And I just want to remind us, before we start the first panel or the first speaker, the 4 questions of the conference. First, government initiatives. What is the role of government in e-health? Second, technological possibilities and business opportunities. Where is the industry headed? Fourth, regulatory and legal challenges. Where are the key roadblocks? And lastly, and as an NGO person, that's of course of a big interest to me, benefits and acceptance by society. Do the benefits outweigh the skepticism? So that was our introduction to the conference. I would like to ask now in Toronto, are you ready for our first speaker? I don't.
Can you hear me, Alex?
Yes?
We're ready. Go ahead.
Okay. So I would like to start our first session, Technological Developments and Implications, with our first speaker, Dr. Christian Krey. He is CEO of Emperor Digital Diabetes Care, and what he does and why he's here, he will explain now himself. Good to have you here.
Thank you for the introduction. Sehr geehrter Botschafter, ladies and gentlemen,
Should we just wait for the microphone?
I'm very happy to be here. When I heard that our counterparts are in Toronto, 2 things came on my mind. One thing is, I visited Toronto 15 years ago, and I bought my children a t-shirt. And on the t-shirt were the writings, I thought my daddy was tall until I saw the CN Tower. But the second thing, and this is the introduction in our part, diabetes care, is that in the early 1920s, 2 people developed insulin in Toronto. It was Bunting and Best. And until then, this was the start into modern diabetes technology. So I'm very happy to find the link to what we do today. I have a little agenda about diabetes care, about the solution that we have, about the results of an insurance-sponsored trial, about patients' outcomes, and of course about what we are doing today. Diabetes today worldwide are about 387 million people living with diabetes, which is a huge number. But this number will explode to nearly 600 million people living with diabetes in the year 2035. This is one number. A sad number is that every 7 seconds, someone is dying due to diabetes. And this is something where we have to act. The problem is that all the diabetes therapy is based on data, and this data is collected by the patient himself, and this data ends up in a manual diary, and this manual diary looks like that one. This is from a real patient. And the numbers you can or maybe cannot see are hardly readable, are surely not complete, and sometimes these numbers are even wrong. So we do not wonder that about 40 to 60% of all people with diabetes do not reach their individual targets because the therapy is based on a bad quality of data. Having said that, last year we spent every $9th for diabetes therapy, for the therapy of secondary complications, and that was $613 billion. And we don't have enough money to afford, or we cannot afford that. So our solution is come back to the problem, come back to the manual diary. When you talk about diabetes therapy is one goal, reduce glucose levels and reduce the variability of glucose levels. So this is the target. And to reduce hypoglycemia and to reduce hypoglycemia. So you're always in the middle, not going too low, not going high low. The market need is very clear. The physicians, being a specialist or being a generalist, they want to see the blood glucose data, which was available through to downloadable blood glucose measurement meters, but they also want to see how much insulin the patient have injected. This was, until today, not possible. So we developed hard and software system where at the end, the physician as well as the patient can see both. They see the glucose levels and they see the corresponding insulin injections. This is a real patient, and on the very left-hand side hand, you can see that there are yellow bars and there are blue bars who indicate the amount of the time of insulin injected. Our software has an algorithm in place, and this algorithm can also show if the patient has interswitched his insulin pens. So if there is an error in injecting insulin, and this is an example where we see that mistake, the patient and the physician have reacted, and now he's doing a very good job. This works as a heart. The portal that you've seen is the heart. One thing, of course, you need the data. The data come on the one hand via our blood glucose meter, which sends the data, the blood glucose levels, time and date, wirelessly and fully automatically to this portal. So the patient has to do nothing. No cable to inject, to plug in, no button to press, no software to install, no app, nothing. Fully automatically. In addition to that, we have developed smart insulin pens. These smart insulin pens are worldwide unique due to two things. One thing is these insulin pens can use every insulin that's on the market. So you don't have to need one insulin from a special insulin producer. You can use all insulins that are available on the market today. This is one thing. On the other hand, and this is absolutely critical for the system, this insulin pen also transfers the data fully automatically. First time wireless transfer of insulin data. So the patient injects insulin as he did before, measures blood glucose as he did before, and the data is automatically in the portal where the physician can see that. So you see on the right-hand side, on the right side, the physician, but also the relatives can see the data, the mother of a child or the children who wants to see the data from his parent. In addition to that, we have also developed a Bluetooth insulin pen for people who see their smartphone as the center of the data management, and the smart insulin pen then transfers the data to an app, and with this app we can also link not only to our own blood glucose meter, but we're also able to link these data or to download data from third-party hardware. So we're absolutely open because at the end of the day we only want to see the data. I want to give you the results of the trial that we did together with the German health insurer. What we did, we got a lot of patients together, type 1s and type 2s, nearly 220 patients. They are already using insulin, but they're on a bad shape. Their so-called HbA1c, which is the mean glucose level, is much too high. So much too high means in this sentence 8.7%. You should be about 7%. So it's absolutely too high. And what we did, we developed our system, give that to the patient and the physician, and then the physician was able to see the data and react and to adjust therapy. And then we see that the HbA1c goes down, and after 1 year, another bettering in the glucose levels. So we really show in a trial it works. In addition to that, we are able to see that there is no higher risk of hypoglycemia. So although they go down with the blood glucose levels, they don't go too down to get a hypoglycemia. This is for safety reasons absolutely interesting. I like to show you one case. I hope you can see that there are the insulin levels are going up and down. There's a high variability, a lot of reds in the spreadsheet. And after 3 months using our system, the patient was in better shape. He has less variability. The glucose levels are in lower range. So this is not a study, it's a real patient. It's a real patient who benefit from our system, together, of course, with the physician. Where are we today? We have CE conformity for the hardware as well as for the software. So our software is a medical device. We have data and IT security regarding ISO 27001, which means that we absolutely take care of the patient's data. We have proven the medical benefit that I've shown you a few seconds before, and we have this acceptance. Patients as well as physicians use this system. And in Germany, we got reimbursement for the system. So every health insurer in Germany reimburses our system. Every patient who uses insulin is able to get that. And this was a huge step that we achieved a half year ago. We are currently getting the first market access in Germany with the sales reps. And what we are doing today to get more market access, we are, of course, looking for cooperation partners with strategic companies. We want to drive our EU market approach since we got EU CE mark. And then, of course, we're looking above the ocean to go, on the one hand, to the US market, where we need FDA approval. On the other hand, and this is something where we talk about a little later, to Canada, where it's not so hard to get approval once you have CE mark. So as a conclusion, we offer better monitoring between the visits. We offer better glucose control with less risk of getting those secondary complications like blindness or kidney disease or heart attack, and though we got the patients more quality of life. And at the end of the day, we also show that we can save money. This number, 4,500 euros, are the costs when the patient get into the hospital because he has a hypoglycemia and was unconscious. So this is something that we really can save. No one of our patients in this trial had to go into the hospital due to hypoglycemia. So we also show benefit on a medical side, but also on an economical scale. So this is what we are currently doing today. I'm very happy that the colleagues from Toronto are here, where insulin was developed in the 1920s, and this is something that would not be possible when insulin was not developed today. So thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Christian. We will take now questions directly. If you have a direct question to the presentation, and the same is for Toronto. Tony, I would like you to give me a signal if there are questions from Toronto.
Yes, are there any questions so far to the presentation? Yes, we have a question from Dr. John Ross, please.
If you wouldn't mind moving to the podium so we can see you. I don't see if that's too far, but that would be nice. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you very much I just wanted to make it more of a comment than anything else. I think this is an incredibly important disease process which we don't appreciate, I don't think, in the general public. This is a huge burden of disease that is coming our way. And I think this particular solution, as part of many other solutions to trying to manage this, it sounds excellent. And I just would like to applaud your work so far. So I hope that this has success, but I think we absolutely have this, just a disaster coming our way. We really do need to manage diabetes.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's time for more questions if there are.
I don't see any. I see one more hand. Just 1 second, please.
Hi, this is Ivy Wong from Women's College Hospital. I just had a question about the patient population that you're able to look after with your software. Does it also include patients who are pre-insulin pump, or does it only really work with the insulin pens connected?
Yeah, thank you for that question. We are only focusing on people that are using insulin pens, so that are on MDI. We do not target people that are currently on an insulin pump. So this is something that is a different patient type. But we are also targeting people that want to use our system instead of a pump. So we are a real alternative to an insulin pump.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any more hands here, so over to you, Alex.
Okay, any more questions here? I would have a question. One I'm going to take later to the podium, but one direct. On one slide you said, and then it's also the relatives who can see, how it works and how much insulin would need and so on. And I think of youngsters who might not want always, or like an elderly couple and the husband anyway sort of getting into the whole business and his wife taking control. How do you deal with these human factors of your advice?
There are two things. One thing is when you take a child, then there are the areas where the patient, where the parents want to see the data, and the child is okay with that. Then when they're older, they don't want the parent to see the data, but then they also don't want to write this manual diary. So then they use our system for documentation, but don't let the patient, the parents see the data. And then there comes the time where they say, okay, I want to invite my physician and my nurse to see the data. So different areas, different ages, and everybody finds some benefit for himself.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Christian, we will see you back on the podium in just 20 minutes. And now we will be turning over to Toronto, and I would like to take John Ross to take the podium. Already giving the first question. Hello, John. This is Alex. You are medical director at Praxis Medical Group, and you will be giving us now a view into this second big part of what we call e-health, telemedicine. And I don't know if you can see that in Toronto, but I got this very nice board of the Canadian Embassy, and it shows us just again how big your country is and why you might like to rely sometimes on telemedicine. And I know your company has a long experience, including yourself. So whenever you're ready for your presentation, we're looking forward to it.
Can you hear me?
We hear you.
Testing. There we go. Okay, just want to make sure. So first of all, thank you very much. I'm really excited about being here. I really had no idea, quite honestly, what I was getting into. And despite my attempts to read the webpage, now that I'm here and getting a sense of what this is about, this is really a fascinating process. So thank you to Renee Bosenhart and Hannes Wieland for getting me here and inviting me here. I think this is going to be cool. Unfortunately, our colleagues in Germany cannot appreciate the view that we're all experiencing here on the 53rd floor overlooking Toronto on a blazing sunny day. It is spectacular. And so I'm going to be competing, I think, with the view to try and keep everybody focused on me. But anyway, you can do whatever you wish, of course. I'm afraid the people in Germany are stuck with me mostly.
We have a very focused audience here in Berlin.
Excellent, excellent. I was also encouraged by the comments by the ambassador at the beginning, actually on both sides, so certainly from our site though, who really nailed things well, talking about the use of telemedicine for remote settings, and that's what we've been doing for a long time. So I'm going to share, it's more almost like storytelling that I'm going to be trying to do here, and I look forward to any comments or questions that may be coming up. I am an emergency physician, so I work in emergency departments doing shift work, but I've also been doing telemedicine for the last 18, almost 19 years now, and I'll explain a little bit more about that as I go. So I guess I don't have a button to push. I'm just going to be asking for slide advancement, and I guess I don't really have it in front of me either, so I'm going to have to guess at what there we go, great. So that's actually just a picture of a ship in the background, and so if you could just advance, please. So I'm going to just to give you a quick story about Praxis and where it came from, a little bit more about the details of telemedicine, and I think everyone's probably have their own conceived ideas about what telemedicine means, and I'm going to try and touch upon some of that. I'm going to give you two quick examples using audio calls that we've taken, and then talk about some of the impact, and then a touch upon some of the economics, because that's usually what drives things. Next slide, please. So I was looking for our Praxis logo, and I went online, and this is what popped up. I was kind of shocked to find out that Praxis, according to the internet, has lots of other visuals that go along with it. So could I have the next slide, please, quickly? There's our logo. So it was on, I had to scroll down a little bit to find it, but interesting how many Praxis hits one can get. Yeah, next slide, please. So, and again, just you have to keep your finger on the clicker. Next, there we go. So we started, that's great, thank you. We started in 1997 based on a offshore oil and gas sector that was developing in Nova Scotia. And they required medevac services, first of all, to get injured workers off or sick workers off remote sites, but they also required medical oversight for medics that were working in that setting, as well as some of the support vessels. And so we started providing remote telemedical advice and support in the offshore. Well, it's a very safe industry, and so the number of calls that we got was very, very few. And we had pagers and cell phones. We kind of developed a system, so we said, well, who else is out there? And it turns out that there are other people that have interests in remote support. And so that evolved. We created a company of 5 doctors and 1 engineer who happens to be my wife at the same time. And off we went, and we were kind of figuring it out as we went. We were lucky to be starting in telemedicine, I suppose, relatively early. Fast forward to 2015, we now provide medical advice and support to the East and West Coast, so the whole Canadian Navy. Even doctors occasionally will call us as a second opinion, but we provide support to the medics and to the physician's assistants on board. The Canadian Coast Guard has nurses on their vessels, research vessels in the far north. They'll call. We have fishing companies, oil and gas, both land and sea. So Western Canada, which is suffering a little bit from oil prices these days, but they also call us from land sites. We have several other offshore sites. Remote mining, construction companies, research teams during the summers when they're going into the north. Clinics. I'll talk about select patient projects a little bit towards the end. We've also then developed software to support our telemedical work, because we have to keep track of everything that we're doing. And we also do medical kits and staffing as a result of putting people on remote places. So we have 22 physicians that are now part of our team, as well as a number of employees. So it's a robust little business. I'm not going to retire quickly on this, but it's going well, and it's gradually growing. So it's quite fun to do. It's very different than going into a night shift on Christmas night, as an example. So it's fun to do this. And as a result of some success with a race that we did 2 years ago, we've now started a joint venture with a company called Clipper Venture, and we've created Clipper Telemed Plus, which is aimed at more remote work within the marine sector. Next slide, please. So what is telemedicine? Well, I think many of us think of a screen with a boom mic, with sort of constant video monitoring and full motion video, and that's telemedicine to many people. And most of our telemedicine has been done telephonically on a telephone. And so really, the telemedicine is joining a person in need with a provider. And it can be through a booked arrangement, so that at 2 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon, we're going to do a telemedicine consult from remote Northern Ontario or somewhere else to a specialist in Toronto, for instance. That would be telemedicine. We do a full motion video potentially. But in many cases, the caller may not have that kind of bandwidth or that kind of equipment. And it becomes a little bit limiting in that callers then have to go to a site to hook up to a telemedicine unit and then make the connection. So what we've decided is that any caller anywhere, as long as they have some ability to connect through a satellite or through a cell phone, can connect with us. And the other part is that we don't do booked things. We do things because we're emergency service. So these are calls that come completely out of the blue, 24/7, 365. And so we get a caller connected with a physician generally within less than 2 minutes from the moment that they make the phone call to talking to a doctor, and that's part of our deal with the people that we work with. So it's really matching the caller's settings. So if they have the bandwidth and they have the equipment, then we're happy to do either pictures, still pictures, or video. But many of our callers do not have that kind of equipment or that kind of technology or bandwidth in terms of sending things. The other thing that's important to know is that not all doctors are comfortable doing this. Many doctors don't. They need to see a patient in person, and many funding systems actually prevent that too. So there's only a few of us that are kind of crazy enough to say, I'm going to close my eyes and I'm going to listen to what you're telling me, and I'm going to see what I can do in terms of helping you through whatever the situation is. So that's a relatively small number of people that are comfortable doing that, and therefore we're able to leverage that small group and make us available to a larger, basically unlimited number of people that are out there. We also have operational standards and quality assurance piece, so you can't just sort of, there are a couple of companies where the doctor puts a cell phone in his pocket and says, I'm now doing telemedicine. What if he's in the shower? What if he forgets his phone? What if the phone dies? That's not good, reliable service. And so we've put a lot of time and care into both making sure that we have fail-safe backup systems in place, and that we also record and log everything we do, and we're transparent and have quality review processes in place. And Praxis has actually been ISO certified for a number of years. So it's fast, reliable access to experts who are accessible and accountable, and that's really the goal. Next slide, please. Maybe just flip through that again, thank you. So really, some of the basics at sites might be they have a blood pressure cuff, they have an oxygen saturation monitor, they can maybe check the temperature, they can maybe do a glucose. Those are going to be the basic pieces of information we're going to be able to gather. So relatively low-tech stuff that you can get at a clinic somewhere or the back of an ambulance. And then we add tools depending on the medic's skills. So if they can do ultrasound, then great. They can take a little portable ultrasound machine with them, and they can plug that in. But we're not really limited by that. And some of the techno boxes that people sell, which are often $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 for a box that you can open up, and it has a bunch of medical things inside it, hooked up to possibly a automatic sending system, are great. But one has to sort of wonder, so when you've collected all that stuff, now what are we going to do with it? And do they actually use these, and how is it being used? How is it changing the management that I can provide over the telephone? So sometimes collecting a lot of data only to say, well, gee, I've really defined that he's sick, but we're not going to keep him there anyway, so you need to get rid of him. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So non-medical personnel, there may be a benefit to taking a little bit more technology and helping them gather some more data. They don't know who's sick and who's not sick, and so being able to kind of get a bit of a visual through data can sometimes be helpful. Next slide, please. And again, it's really about the last little bullet there was just about the critical piece that if you're spending a lot of time hooking up things and trying to make them work and getting the technology to link up and all that sort of stuff. I mean, even this morning we've been kind of playing with the size of the screen and all sorts of things, so that there are lots of small technical things that can make a difference, but you get consumed by fiddling with that stuff and you're not really taking care of the patient. Everyone can pick up a phone and call, and everyone knows how to do that, and so we can get that connection done very quickly, and then we can decide what kind of extra pieces do you need to add. So how does it work? Well, so a caller at the top left would be from a remote site. You may not be able to see the visual very well, but it's a ship in heavy oceans. It's going up and down, maybe in the middle of nowhere. They'll make a phone call somehow through satellite or through cell phone or whatever they can do to our 24-hour center, who takes the phone call, gets the caller, who are they, will then decide which medical group, because we do have several medical groups across the country, Western group, Ontario, Quebec group, and an Eastern group, which client is calling and which group would be taking the phone call. All the calls are recorded and the connection is made to the doctor, usually within 2 minutes. It goes to the doctor, who then will listen to the story and will make an assessment and be able to provide advice. This is different than HealthLink or one of those 811 nurse call line things where they follow a series of algorithms, and then in our experiences they often say go to emergency. This is really where critical thinking needs to be put into place, and we're thinking about, okay, so where are you? I can't say go to emergency if you're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. This is not an option. I can't send a medevac. All I can do is try and figure out how can we help you where you are right now, because otherwise you're in deep trouble. So the advice part is given, and then again we give advice. We'll say, okay, let's treat. We know that we know often what the medical kit contents are, so we can say, okay, go to the blue bag, open up the front pocket, and pull out this thing. You're going to give them 2 of those 3 times a day, and give me a call later on. We might say, boy, that guy sounds like he's really sick. You need to divert your vessel and go to the nearest port, or if they're within flying distance, then we'll send a helicopter out to go and get them. And then the last part is medical record keeping. So we have an online medical record that you can access from a smartphone or from a computer. We also can send pictures through that, and we can also do live video through a secure system, so that we're not going through Apple or Skype or any of those sort of things. It's direct and secure that way. Next slide, please. So why do we use it? Well, first of all, for the offshore, for instance, they say you need to have this. So it's a health and safety regulation that requires some sort of, we call it topside medical support. And so that's kind of a no-brainer. And many industries require this. There may be limited or no resources, and people realize, boy, we need some medical assistance for certain things that might happen. So we're going to put this in place ahead of time. Some people may have done something and gone off on a yachting voyage somewhere, and they had a medical emergency that was not very, didn't go well, or just made everyone very uncomfortable. And that's one of those aha moments. Next time, before we go, we should have something in place before we set out. And then the insurance companies are now growing more and more, saying, boy, there seems to be some advantage to having a telemedical support where we can start screening people before they go to access a healthcare center where they're going to be charged a lot of money for their travel insurance. Maybe we can get some advice prior to them going. And lo and behold, that's actually been a huge saving for companies. Go ahead, next slide, please. So who's calling? Well, there's a variety of people. So it may be a paramedic nurse, it may be a doctor in some cases. So obviously they have medical expertise already, and they're going to they're calling about trying to refine their treatment, getting a second opinion. And so they're usually, they're really nice callers to have, because I'm talking to someone who can really give me good quality advice, or give me a good quality setting of the patient and describe them quite well. We also get a lot of calls, though, from non-medical people, a captain of a vessel, an experimental research group leader who may have first aid as their basic training. And so in that case, it's obviously a little bit more vague in terms of their findings. We have to ask a few more questions, but we can still walk them through things if we know what kind of training they've had, and if they have a medical kit that we're familiar with or that we've suggested to them, they can actually do a lot of things with that. And then we have non-medical people who have limited medical supplies. They have a first aid kit that they haven't opened for years. They don't even know what's inside it, and they have some guy with some problem they can't describe very well. And those ones are challenging, as you might imagine, because it's often a phone call from a small fishing boat off the coast of Nova Scotia, and all we can really say is, boy, that guy does sound sick. You know, there's only one thing you can do, which is head into shore, and we'll see if we can arrange a medevac if that's required. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about the data around some of these callers. Next call, please. Next slide, please. So this is the Clipper Venture race is a 12-yacht, 70-foot yacht race that goes around the world over 11 months. They have one professional skipper, and they have 20 crew that change depending on which leg they're going on around the world. And many of these people have never been on a sailboat before their training began, or some of them do have some sailing experience. So it's a wide range of people that are on board these things. People like yourselves who decide, you know, I've always wanted to go around the world on a sailboat and I'd like to race. I'm going to sign up for this, and that's who gets on these things. And so it's a really diverse group. So unfortunately, in the middle of the Pacific, coming from China over to San Francisco, one of the people fell off the boat, and you can imagine that's not a cool thing to do. Well, in fact, it is unfortunately a cool thing to do, but cool from the water point of view, temperature-wise. So next slide, please. We'll see if the audio works. It's a satellite call. Next slide, please.
11 degrees centigrade. We pulled him out, and he was hypothermic. We weren't able to record the temperature because it recorded the
Please. Next slide, please. So this is a case where the fellow fell out overboard. He was quickly lost out of sight, and they had to then do their man overboard drill. It was heavy seas. Luckily, it was during the daytime, otherwise he would have been gone. He was truly in the middle of the ocean, and they took them 90 minutes of trying to get around and missing and around and missing to get him out of the water. He was, at this point, cold. He was sort of semi-conscious, so he's like a big sack of potatoes, and he had to get him out of the water, you know, over a big hull into the boat down below to get him warmed up, and that's when they made their phone call. And again, so that was only just a little segment of that phone call. But you can imagine getting the call in Canada, hi, we've got this guy, just fell off, he's cold, he's barely conscious, you know, what do we do? So we have to sort of go through that mental checklist of trying to provide some advice. He actually did very well and warmed up, and he had a soft tissue injury to his leg, which turned out to be nothing. So a happy ending.
Yeah, I agree with you, Captain. I agree with you.
Just the next button, please. So this was a case of a fisherman on a fishing vessel who was having chest pain down below in the factory floor, and they called to say, and this captain had actually had a heart attack in his past, and so said, I think this guy looks the same as what I felt like 4 years ago. And so we had to then talk them through some basic treatment. Giving aspirin, believe it or not, is the equivalent of giving the clot-busting drug. Giving them together is actually that much better, but giving him even just simple aspirin was a really important part of this guy's treatment. And anyways, we gave some other advice. He was going to give him something else that would have caused him some problems, so I think there was real advantage to us talking to him while we got the medevac going. And so from the moment of the call, We were able to talk to getting the search and rescue people involved. The search and rescue people called us several times to get some more advice. We provided the support to the search and rescue personnel after they hauled him off the boat, and he got into the cath lab and had his coronary vessel opened up within 6 hours of the initial chest pain, which was, again, one of those success stories, and he did very well. Notice I'm not telling you about the unsuccess stories, but we have very few of those, luckily. Next slide, please. So this is a busy-looking thing, but I want to just kind of talk you through just very briefly, because I think so this is a sampling of types of callers that we get. So the blue bars are the people from off the coast of Nova Scotia, no relationship with Praxis. They call through the Joint Rescue Coordination Center, which is the Coast Guard, to say, we have a medical emergency on board, can you put us in touch with somebody? And that's really all they're doing. And there are similar settings in Norway, in Denmark, in Holland, in Italy. So there's a number of places that will take phone calls. They tend to go into a mix of medical providers that may or may not be that familiar with this sort of setting, and so this is what we do all the time, is take remote calls, so we're reasonably happy with those. But so they'll usually call to one of those, the labels there on the second bar graph is called, it says percent med surge. So most of the calls they're making are going to be ones that are headache, chest pain, abdominal pain. It's not trauma. It's not sort of obvious trauma. It's something's gone on that's given them now some pain somewhere or some shortness of breath, and they're concerned about that, and so that's why they're calling. And because they have so few medical equipment and really no training, many of these calls cannot be treated on site. And so the blue bar on the third graph is really just sort of saying that many of those people we have to medevac off because they just can't stay on board. We can't really give them very much advice because they don't have much skill or much stuff. The second group is the orange group, and these are our fishing vessels and some others that actually have some equipment that we're familiar with on board their boat. We've suggested that they have extra stuff that can then allow them to treat more sophisticated things, and we can talk the captain through a fair amount. So they're also calling with, so they're calling more often, relative numbers, but the number of people that we have contracted with is actually relatively little compared to all the ships off the east coast of Nova Scotia. So smaller, kind of smaller denominator of people, but they're calling more often, which again is interesting. And they call more often because they can, and they know how to, which is also helpful. And so most of the calls they're calling about are also medical problems. These are tough fishermen. If they break something or they bruise something or they whack up against something, they know it's going to be sore, they suck it up. We'll compare that to another group in a second. So I can treat many of those people on board. When they call more often, they're calling with a swollen face from a dental infection, which we can treat on board. They're calling with some other things we can often treat on board, and therefore the number of medevacs or diversions is small. And then the last group are the Clipper Venture people, who tend to be calling even more often despite their relatively small numbers. These are people that are executives, and so their tolerance for medical bruises or whatever is relatively low. So they're calling more often. They're not calling, they're calling more with kinds of trauma things. So twisted shoulder, sore back, multiple sort of musculoskeletal things, because they're being thrown around inside this piece of plastic, 70-foot piece of plastic on the ocean. So they're going to get a lot of trauma, usually minor trauma. And so we can treat all those people basically on site. So that we only do like we did one medevac in the whole year with Clipper Venture people. So I think it sort of gives you a sense of when you start having some more refined things, we can actually keep them on board. The next slide, please. Almost done. So the interpretation is, again, the JRCC, which is the Joint Rescue Coordination, the Coast Guard calls are coming from many sailors that are out there, but they don't call very often because they don't think of it, or they don't know about it, or they just don't think there's any point. But when something's bad's happening, they'll call because they want a medevac, and that's sort of basically why they're calling. Whereas Praxis clients will call for medical advice. They want some refinement on the kit they have, and they think that they can possibly treat the person on board, which is what we've done. And we've actually managed to decrease the number of diversions by the fishing company from 17 per year down to about 2 or 3, 4 per year, which is a huge saving. Each one of those diversions costs about $125,000. Next page, next slide, please.
Yeah, and John, I would like you to wrap up slowly so that we can start the podium.
This is my very last one, actually, I think, or close to the last one. So just some costs. This is kind of the economics piece of it. That the fishing client, the savings cost for them, so that they save about 3.5 to 4 times what they pay us to be available. As I said, each diversion costs about $120,000. So if we can prevent a few of those per year, we are well worth our weight. The yacht race, again, sort of a 4-to-1 ratio of what it costs. We saved them 305,000 pounds over the course of 11 months in preventing people going to local clinics wherever they were stopping around the world. And so the insurance costs were down significantly as a result of that. We also provide advice to a medical, to an international high school in Ontario where international students were going to the local clinics and emergency departments for relatively minor problems. And we've been able to call screen those people and prevent a huge amount of charge to the insurance companies. Initially, the savings cost was something like 8-to-1. We're now sort of bumped up our cost a little bit to make it more 5-to-1. And there are corporate benefits too, so that people are spending less time away from work and have a higher satisfaction. Next slide, please. So random callers, no training, variable connections. Really, we can't do a whole lot. We can try, and we provide a service, but it's a difficult group to deal with sometimes. Trained callers, I think we provide more refined advice and support, better quality of onboard care, fewer medevacs for sure, and a greater confidence. The crew feel and the captain feels more confident when they go out. Next slide, please. Maybe just go back if you can. If not, it doesn't matter that much. Oh, it's okay. Oh, there we go. Zing, 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 zing. Anyway, I was just going to say that we're just leveraging limited resources, and I think there's a pretty good economic argument for doing this. I'll stop at that point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. This gave us a terrific impression of telemedicine, what it really can be. If you could switch off the presentation, please. Yeah, thank you. And John, we're gonna take the questions from the audience right when we sit now all together on the podium. So I would like to call in Toronto onto the panel Shivani and Zaina to join John, and Tony, if you could also join the podium. And here in Berlin, I would like Christian to come back to the podium, and our next guest, Kai Sachs. Okay. So, wenn ich da sitzen darf. All right, if you could move the camera in Toronto a bit more to the left. Tony is left, sort of, yeah. But we see, may I just introduce Shivani Goyal. Do you pronounce that right? Yes? From the Center for Global eHealth Innovation, and Dr. Zaina Kayat, Senior Advisor at Mars Excite. And here in Berlin, new to the podium, is Kai Sachs from SAP Healthcare Business Networks. Okay, are we all set? Can we start?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, please make sure that your microphones are on. As I said, John, I'm going to take questions on your presentations once we are through with the round, except there's a question from the audience which would have to be answered right now. No? Okay. So we go ahead. The panel discussion we have now here will be on the technological developments and implications. And we had now two very good introductions, what that can mean. On one hand, treating diabetes as a chronic disease, combining all kinds of new techniques, and for a longer term established telemedicine. And I'm very happy for the new guests of the podium, and I'm going to make a little round now and make them introduced. And would like to start with Shivani from the Center for Global eHealth Innovation. Hello there.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for having me. Good morning, everyone in Toronto, and hi to everybody in Berlin.
Hello. I'm speaking to you now from your back. I don't know if you can see me, but I can see me behind you. Hi there. All right.
That works. That's okay.
That's okay, I hope. Right. For a start, please explain us what you do and especially what the Center for Global eHealth Innovation stands for. Some of our Toronto friends will see the center later during the field trip, but please give us all an insight into your work.
Absolutely. So a little bit about myself to start. So I'm currently doing my PhD in biomedical engineering at University of Toronto with a focus on how to utilize health technology to improve chronic disease management. So that brought me to the Center for Global eHealth Innovation, which is located in Toronto General Hospital. So it's a non-for-profit organization with approximately 100 folks who come from varying backgrounds, focused on figuring out how to improve the use of technology for efficacious healthcare delivery. So these people include engineers, such as myself. We work with clinicians, software developers, and graphic designers to understand the fundamental needs of patients and healthcare providers and how to bring them into the conversation when developing technology. This brings us to one of our key points of focus, which is human factor. So our human factors group works with patients from the hospitals that surround us in Toronto. So there's 4 huge hospitals that surround us, giving us the ability to really be embedded in the clinical setting. So essentially, we bring these patients into our office, which is a huge usability lab. It's actually the largest usability lab in all of North America, and you'll see it later in the field trip. And essentially what this allows us to do is replicate clinical settings where we bring the patient into and try to gauge what's going wrong in the current healthcare delivery model. For example, when they're using IV pumps, where is the miscommunication occurring, and how can we capture that and then improve technology from that perspective? There's a vast breadth of work that we do, but coming back to the software applications, that's my particular focus, is trying to look at how can we use mobile phones and smartphone devices to improve long-term chronic disease management. And I'll cap it at that for the interest of time, but I'm happy to go into more depth depending on what comes up in the panel.
Thank you, Shivani. One first question from my side, to make it perhaps a little bit more illustrated. You personally work a lot on a project on prostate cancer. Could you describe us sort of what's happening in that project, sort of, if I may say, on the ground?
Absolutely. So actually, my focus is diabetes, and I'd love to give you a preview of that maybe in a bit. But the prostate cancer app is actually very novel and interesting. So we're working with Trillium Hospital here, who is struggling to keep track of their prostate cancer survivors. So essentially, these patients have gone through prostate cancer treatment and relapse due to a lack of tracking of their symptoms and being able to provide just-in-time treatment to them. So we created a mobile application that allows them to track their daily quality of life, symptoms, and most interestingly, pulls in their PSA lab results from the Ontario Information System. So what this means is, if a patient is going to a lab to get blood work done, we are now able to pull that lab result into the mobile application and show it to the patient so they have an understanding of how they're doing with their prostate cancer. And you can imagine for somebody going through this traumatic experience, that's quite powerful. When we also presented this and discussed this with patients, this was something they absolutely wanted. Now, as a clinician, you're probably wondering, oh my gosh, I don't want my patient seeing this result first. What if it freaks them out? Because, they may not understand how to interpret it. So also there is a clinician app that first receives this PSA result, and then the clinician can look at this result in conjunction with how the patient's been doing over the last few months and what their quality of life is. And then they decide whether or not to forward that result to the patient, or whether they need to engage in further education with the patient. So this is actually one of the first examples of us being able to pull in lab results from the provincial ecosystem, which is huge. And we've been working very thoroughly with the government trying to get this up and started. So where that project is currently is we're evaluating it in a clinical trial that will start shortly. So, fundamentally behind all of this is the fact that we're growing on an existing evidence-based, and we are going to evaluate this to see what the outcomes will be moving forward.
Thank you. And that already illustrated very well what the impression I got from your work, also from your website, which is called The Human Factor, that you take very well in account the human factors involved in telemedicine, which is on the one side the patient and on the other side the doctor or the nurse. And last question for you before we go on to Zaina, who would you say is at the moment sort of more to be addressed, patients or medical staff, to get used to e-health and the technologies involved with it?
That's a loaded question. It cannot occur without both sides. It really needs to be a joint venture. So starting with the clinician side, we see when we do surveys in Canada and abroad that clinicians are willing to use these type of technologies. They're just worried by the overwhelming amount of data that's coming in and what to do with it. There's questions around coverage, reimbursement, and accountability fundamentally for all this new sources of data that's coming in. So these are questions we're trying to answer, and I think we can learn from each other what to do in that particular area. From the patient perspective, which is very interesting to me, I am seeing patients of all ages being able to use the technology when it's well designed, ranging from kids that we work with at Sick Kids Hospital for diabetes up to older patients who are not mobile and have heart failure. So I think patients are ready and able to use the technology if they're in the right ecosystem that supports them.
Thank you very much. The topic of big data we will take up in a second when I talk to Kai, but before I would like to welcome Zaina once again. And you're director of Mars Excite, and I'm happy you're here because for me you're a very essential part of the podium because you represent the whole new startup scene in the e-health sector. So could you just tell me what you do with Mars concerning e-health?
Hi, good morning, everybody. Hello to Germany. So yeah, I'm Zaina. I lead the Health System Innovation Platform at Mars Discovery District. Mars stands for Medical and Related Sciences, and it's an innovation hub really for Canada to help get us out of an industrial economy and into an innovation economy by harvesting a new set of assets called knowledge assets, and health is a big focus. And so we're enabling that to happen. As you said, a key part of what we do is building the next generation of companies that are going to solve the biggest problems of the world needs solving and also drive our economy, and health is a big part of that. So we support about 300 startups, about 200 of them are in digital health, and we just do whatever we can to help them go from their idea to fix big problems to international scale. And so that's one big part of Mars. I don't actually lead that part. I used to, but I don't. So I'm happy to talk about that separately. Why startups? The work to be done to enable an e-healthy Canada or Germany is a massive, massive disruption of a fundamental paradigm and foundation of what our systems were designed for, which is a very physical, physician-mediated delivery of services. That is all ripe for being eliminated off the table and to people becoming the CEO of their own health. That's only going to happen with technology, and that's only going to happen, or the leaders of that are entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs bust open the status quo incumbents, health systems, hospitals, are not designed to self-annihilate. They're just not. That's Clay Christensen's theory. So that's why we focus on entrepreneurs, not just because it's sexy and fun. The other half of Mars, which is what I lead, is actually taking the platform and innovating at the level of the system. I just did a tweet, you could look at it, that says all these startups and all these tech, everything we're doing is completely playing at the margins of a fundamentally broken system. Our system was not designed to meet the needs of the society today. And so that's what I do, because if we don't fix the roots, the tree will die. And so I'll just highlight two things that we work on out of four at a system level that I think are relevant to this discussion. One is this program called Excite, Excellence in Clinical Innovation and Technology Evaluation, but basically we broker a process to help the Ontario health system proactively find and pull in very, very disruptive technologies, digital and otherwise. And unfortunately, I wish the system on its own would be innovative in learning and adapting, but it's not. And so we broker it through this program. And I can talk about that separately. We're scaling that now to Europe, United States, and Australia. And then the other thing I work on, and I'm reflecting on your prostate cancer, at a system level we're working on is, it is insane, honestly insane, and I literally, I use that word literally, that the person who has the biggest stake in their health can't get their own data. I fully disagree that anybody should decide whether or not they get their PSA lab results. It's my data. And until that information flows first, foremost, to and through me, the citizen who's paying for this health system, we will never, ever realize that e-healthy. We won't. We can do all the fun stuff we want. The data belongs to us. We decide who gets it. We have a major blockade of that data, so I don't know what goes on in Germany, but in Ontario, if I want to get my data, I need a really, really powerful fax machine. I need many hours to get those faxes, and I have to pay $10 a page. So until that changes, none of this will work. And so our most ambitious project is called My Health, and we're basically creating a gateway layer that connects citizens of Ontario to all of their formal medical data. We think when we build this gateway, the world's innovators will flock to Ontario to interoperate with that data, and we think we're going to unlock massive innovation. So I'll stop there. I'm not that passionate about this, as you could tell, but happy to keep having the discussion.
Oh, if you're so passionate about data, you should come to Germany. It's like it's one of our favorite topics, and I would like to ask you one question before we continue that topic with Kai. You just said disruptive industries and so on. We had last year the topic of startups and the startup scene in Toronto and in Berlin and how you can do it. And it was all sort of quite a few startups which would work outside of a regulated state system. How do you get a startup part of such a regulated system like health? I mean, I'm thinking of the German situation. Which product of a startup can be paid for by my regular health insurance and which is not, and who is deciding on that, leaving apart all the tests and so on before. What's the situation? How do you go along with the startups at Mars?
Yeah, it's just as bad here in Canada. Our startups are making incredible solutions. They're getting sales all over the world, but not in their own country. And so we do a lot of work on trying to help our system open up to access these technologies. Dr. Ed Brown just walked in the room. We're working with them on a project he'll talk about. So it's just as bad. And again, it's not the startup's fault. It's not really, the people who want the technology's fault. Our system was never designed for innovation. So you're going to get exactly the system you have. It's impenetrable. So that's what these other things I'm working on. So what they do instead is they kind of double, they have a double market model. So most of our digital health startups have a consumer offering or a private market offering, retail pharmacy, private insurance, et cetera. That gets them a customer base and frankly incredible data that they can then have a really strong evidence base and then come into the regulated formal medical system with a much stronger product and value proposition, and that seems to be working. It also is a nice way to bootstrap the startup because they can generate revenues in the private markets to fund the ability to do the much deeper research required to enter the formal medical system.
Thank you very much. I'm gonna introduce now Kai to the discussion, and then after his presentation, we will open up again the podium for questions and have a general discussion. So welcome, Kai. You are from SAP, and we had a prep talk this week, which was really enlightening for me, and I hope we can transfer that also here. Big data is a big topic for you also because you're coming from a company which is sort of familiarized with the topic from other fields. Listening to Zaina, what would you say are the big sort of challenges concerning big data and e-health?
So, yeah, first of all, thanks for the invitation here. And I'm really happy to talk to you about e-health. And I'm coming from a computer science background, so my background is in cloud computing and big data, so I'm less in medicine. So I'm focusing on healthcare since 1 year now, and I'm leading a team here in the Innovation Center in Potsdam focusing on healthcare applications. And for us, the whole data story in e-health is quite challenging. So we see several problems here. I think we were at a field trip at Charité, and we saw that they have already 4 PB on data, and that are huge amounts of data which needs to be managed. And what we also can see that we have here a lot of different data sources which are in a lot of cases not very well integrated. So we have many sources, maybe even in one hospital and one which are not integrated to each other, so that when I go to a doctor, for example, a cardiology, we don't know anything about my previous stories in other departments. And for us, that is one of the key things we were currently working on. So we want to integrate the data of different sources and bring that together. I think we saw a very good example today at Charité, how this can work and how we can, also the patient and the doctor can really benefit by such a solution. However, this is currently not standard. I guess, so in Germany it's not standard, and I guess also the same in Canada. And the second thing is, if we now talk about this data, what we currently see is that we also get new technologies coming into place, and that is genomics data, omics data, which are also now flooding us with data. And I think what we currently saw until now is, compared to what will come, nothing in terms of data amount. So if you now look at next generation sequencing, we have machines who create for one sample 200 gigabyte raw data. That means if you have a healthy person, or you take a sample of a person and, for example, a tumor of this person, we have already 400 gigabyte raw data. And if you now think about your hard drive at home, if you go somewhere in a supermarket and you buy a hard drive, this hard drive has enough space to keep the samples of 2 persons. So there are some plans that each newborn child should be sequenced until 2020. And we can see really that we also need to, as a technology company, we really need to discuss how we can manage this amount of data and how we can integrate it into the normal treatment of our patients here. I think we already had a discussion that a lot of doctors are afraid of all the amount of data which is flooding into their practice. So we get all the tracking data, we get a lot of new sensor data, we get genomics data coming in there. And for us, we are really working on innovation technologies who can, let's say, help analyze this data and make it usable for a practitioner. And this is a huge challenge in the current moment, also in terms of big data and also maybe privacy and security. So.
Thank you. Another question to you before I would link back to Zainab on your project of My Data. As you explained to me there, the conversion of data is actually the big challenge which we have ahead of us. How, and Zaina, it would be great if you could comment on that, how if I say, okay, I'm in control of my data, but I don't even know how many different, doctors' offices, hospitals, and my fitness app, where they have the data and how I can draw it all together. So what would be your solution for that? And that's first to Kai and then to Zaina.
To be honest, I'm not really sure whether I have a solution for this. I think it's currently a big question. So a lot of people thought in the US everything will be better once the electronic medical record is introduced. So what we can see now in the market is that everybody has their own electronic medical record here. And yes, everybody talks about standards, but everybody is convinced that his standard is the best. So there's currently no exchange between systems, and what we can see here, and it's exactly the same here, but even if you know where your data is in place, you cannot really combine it currently, or you cannot bring it together. There's not a central point.
Thank you. Zaina?
So, that's the point of the My Health Data Gateway is exactly to solve for that, that you don't need one standard that everyone has to conform to. It just creates a way to convert data from any source into one channel to then be put into a different modality for the user to experience. So think about it like, I don't know, in Canada, if you go and put your bank card at the 7-Eleven, you've just now allowed them to go get data from somewhere else and do a transaction with you. That's basically what we're building. So you actually don't need to build all this interoperability and all these big enterprise infrastructure. It's just a layer of standards that link two worlds together. So, and this is happening in many other places in the world. So honestly, opening up the data and the convergence and all that stuff is about 5% of the problem. This is not a technically hard problem at all. It's complicated, but it's not technically that hard. And privacy, security, all that stuff, we've got solutions for that. The problem is changing behavior and a paradigm of thinking about what health is and who that data belongs to and what to do with it. On the other end, let's say we can beautifully connect all this data, convert it, and let me see it as the person with the biggest stake in this healthcare system. Pick any startup. They could prepare any tool, any dashboard you want to see whatever data you want. That is technically not a hard problem either. It's just when big formal health systems like hospitals decide they're going to get in the business of designing software and portals, and it's not their core capability, and they take years to do it, it becomes obsolete and not really relevant. Whereas kind of startups can do this stuff very nimbly and very quickly. One of our startups, you could check them out. They're free. It's online, called Self-Care Catalysts. As a person who has multiple comorbidities, I could build any app I want to stream whatever data I want. So it's pretty easy to figure out. Again, the challenge is our mindset and our thinking about who's in charge of their own healthcare.
Thank you. And I would like to invite John and Christian back in the discussion, and anybody who would like to join in, raise your hand, give me a sign, and when you're in Toronto, tell Tony, and we will make sure you're part of the discussion. And actually, my next question would be to Christian and John. John, your work is going on since many, many years, and I would say you've left the startup status a long time ago. But still, when you started your business, what were your main sort of obstacles getting it installed? Was it more a problem of the patient using it or of the medical staff working with it? And also, one thing you didn't, or I didn't hear before, who's paying for your services? Because I was wondering, I'm a German on a Canadian boat doing this transatlantic trip. I fall off, and the whole thing, because in the end, I don't know what. Will my German insurance pay for that? Is this my private endeavor?
Great, good series of questions. First of all, we did start 18 years ago, almost 19 years ago now, but I still consider us actually a startup in that we are changing, evolving, responding, trying to think outside the traditional boxes. So I hope that we're still in startup mode and probably will be for quite some time as the world around us changes. So, and again, because we're small, we are agile. and we want to try and do, so we're actually starting up with doing some direct consumer to doctor calls, which is an interesting experiment that I partially like and partially don't like. But I wanted to, and I will go back to some of your questions too. I just wanted to make a couple of comments about Zaina, because I like her passion, and I totally agree with every word she uttered. I think the technology needs to enable patients to have control over themselves. For too many years, probably several hundred years, we, the medical profession, have basically built up this opaque world around us. We've got this expertise. We've designed funding systems to make sure that you have to pay for my knowledge about your body. It is a bizarre relationship, and yet it seems to be completely part of what we do. So it's very troubling to many of my medical colleagues to be threatened by patients who actually know more about their data and have good questions from either Dr. Google or wherever they're getting it from. Some are more willing to have a conversation with patients. Others are still very threatened by that. So I think it's a fantastic disruption, as a gross technology that we need to definitely embrace. And I'm super keen on the increased transparency and empowerment to patients. What it means, though, is that we need to educate and give people competencies to understand the data as it becomes available to them. Otherwise, they're going to get a number and not know what it means. Another quick comment, too, just as there is a lot of data, and I'm afraid that the noise to signal ratio is getting worse and worse, in that we're getting so much data, we don't quite know what to do with it all. And I think some of those new technologies are solutions that are looking for a problem, and people are wowed by the flashing lights or by the whatever it's doing, and are willing to invest, but they don't actually ask the question, so how does this actually make a difference? Does this matter? What's its impact? And I'm worried about money being spent on things where it's really not going to be particularly useful. So I think Mars is probably doing a great job in helping us to try and figure out what's of value, where should we be, what should we be filtering out, and so we can focus on some really important questions and try and come up with some solutions. Praxis, if you fall off the boat and you're a German on a Canadian boat or on a UK boat in this case, it's really different funding mechanisms. In many of the cases that we do, we are like an insurance company, a shipping company, or a yacht owner, or an insurance company will pay us a daily rate to be available. And so again, because we're 24/7, we don't do very many fee-for-service type calls. It's usually you pay a very small amount for us to be available to you anytime. And so where you're from and whether you have money in your pocket doesn't really matter. You've kind of paid up front, or you're paying continuously. The more people that are on board, I guess the less it is. And as I said, it's a series of different funding arrangements depending on who the client is and what their expectations are, is how it works. And to be honest, I mean, I look at what we cost. We're not making a lot of money in this business so far. I mean, most of us are doing it because it's fun, it's interesting, it's entrepreneurial, it's very different than what we normally do. So I think that hopefully answers part of your question anyway.
It does. Thank you. Tony, you tell me when there are questions from the audience in Toronto. Any questions at that moment from the Berlin audience?
Yes, we have. Oh, okay, go ahead, Alex. We have one question here, though, after that. Yes, I'll hand over to you then.
Hi, I had a question for Dr. Ross, John. I was curious about the patient record. So if someone falls off the boat and you do some care for them and you fill out the patient record, and then they're flown somewhere, Quebec, Ontario, BC, does the patient record follow them and then consequently gets transferred to their system where they're treated?
Great question, thank you. So the online medical record is completed by the physician for every call we do. Depending on the setup prior to this arrangement starting, We're stuck with fax at this point, because most hospitals still have faxes. They don't have access to related things. They don't have an email account or something they can go on, which is again ridiculous. Don't get me started on that whole topic. But anyway, so we're stuck with usually faxes. So once I push submit, I've completed the story. I've done the physical examination. I've done the recommendations. We can actually prescribe medications through our device too. So it'll have a drop-down menu. I'm going to say take 2 of these ibuprofen 3 times a day, an antibiotic potentially, and then I push the button, and it will then log that data on it. And then depending on the relationship with the caller, once I push the submit button, it automatically sends a fax with that sort of salient parts of that record to the caller, to wherever this client wants us to send it. So we're not going to send patient data to the employer, for instance, because that's obviously a breach of confidentiality. But if a medical provider at, say, the hospital as you're talking about, you get medevaced from a remote site to a receiving hospital, they will get a copy of our records, so they know what was the interaction, what were we thinking, here's how we started to treat the person, here's what to expect when this person does arrive at your site. So I think it's it's providing data and information to try and improve the quality of the care of the patient. And then that ideally would then become some part of a medical record so that they know prior to arrival what's happened, what the story was, and what I was hearing. And maybe it might be that the story I obtained in the rigors of this phone call is not quite as accurate as what they can get in the quiet of their hospital too. So it sort of gives them a sense of where this all evolved.
Thank you.
I'll just further add, all the records are then, they're kept in our secure system forever. So we can search that, we can go and draw it up. If there's, touch wood, so far we've not had any legal issues, but if that ever came up, that would be something we would be able to draw upon. And the patient can always have access to the record.
Hi everyone. My question is from Zaina. So first of all, I share the passion with you with respect to access to the patient data, and I try to convey that passion to my students, so to encourage them to push for this. My question is about your My Health project. So how do you compare this with an earlier attempt in the United States, the Blue Button attempt that started actually in 2010? So how successful was that initiative, and how do you compare that then?
Yeah, so our version of the Blue Button is My Health. So we're working very closely with Washington on making sure the standards all comply and learning the best of what they've done. So we're part of a global team with Estonia, Netherlands, and Australia and the United States. So we all learn from each other. So I don't have a comment on the success of Blue Button. I think they've gotten pretty good reach. Just remember, the Blue Button in the U.S., which is the idea would be if I'm a citizen, I can push a blue button and get my data from wherever it sits. That's the idea. The genesis of that was military personnel coming back from Iraq who used to be in one medical system, and then as soon as you become a vet, you're now in the VA medical system, and the data wasn't transferring. That's why they started that process. We don't have that issue of portability as much, so it's not the business driver. For My Health, the business driver is this. Anyone want to guess how many hours a year somebody with a chronic disease spends managing their illness? Throw a number. 6,000. Okay? And 80% of the demand of our whole health system is chronic, and it's only going to go up. So, of course, if you have a tumor in your brain or you just got shot, you need an acute care system. There's no question. And I'm all for that being digital, but that's not going to make a big dent in the opportunity and the problem. So 6,000 hours. Guess how many of those 6,000 are spent with our formal medical system? 10 hours. So all of our efforts, our noise, our conferences is on these 10 hours of professional time. And there's 5,890 that is me in my house managing my disease. That's the massive, massive opportunity for digital health, I'd say. We can do really fun stuff for digitizing the formal medical system. I think it's going to be diminishing returns without tackling the 6,000 hours.
Thank you, and that brings us back to the diabetes topic, and I would like Christian and Shivani to talk a little bit about how you experience like getting on the market with your product, who's mainly supporting you, is it the patients? And that was a very impressive number, spending 5,990 hours a year on your disease. Is it the patients? Is it really sort of the healthcare system trying to cut costs? Or is it industry pushing onto a market with new products? If I may, I'm gonna ask first Christian and then you, Shivani, from your Canadian perspective, okay?
Thank you for that very interesting question. The first support that we got was from a health insurer. So I showed you the trial that was sponsored by the health insurer because they saw that they spend too much money on those patients with diabetes. So they wanted to see if this approach of telemedicine can help, and we showed, yes, we can. On the opposite, talking to other health insurers is important, but it's not so easy because they want to see the cost reductions this year and not the cost reductions in 5 or 10 years. So this is a hard way to go. And in fact, it took us almost 2 years to get reimbursement from all the health insurers. So the German health insurance are a bit hard to talk to.
And who would you talk to when you plan now to go to Canada?
Going to Canada is easier than going to the US, since we don't need this FDA. Once we have CE mark, there is an easier and a faster process to go to Canada. And in fact, we will start this process in January next year. So I'm very happy to be here today to see there is also a need in Canada and that we have a solution that will help your patients over there.
All right, Shivani, I would hand over to you.
That's a really interesting point that Christian brings up about the return on investment for diabetes solution is not immediate. And that tends to be a challenge when getting governments and local bodies to adopt some of the great solutions that we know work based on a lot of our research. So now, based on this aha moment that I think we're having, we're turning, at least from a public perspective, so innovators like us who are from the public seat are turning to some of our private sector partners, looking at a consumer strategy on how to access people who may not be interacting day to day with the healthcare system, but are actually just going to their Walmart or their pharmacy looking for solutions and empowering them from that perspective. So it's a very exciting opportunity, and I think is going to bring us to the market quicker and in a more effective way.
All right, and Kai, I'm just one more question from my side, Tony, and to finish that point.
We have, okay, go ahead.
Okay, Kai, because you're representing SAP, a big private player, and I wouldn't say that at the funding of SAP, you probably thought of being big in the health market. Now, you told me a lot of your colleagues and so on, you really love the idea that you're part of the healing process, if I may say. What will be for your company like the long-term vision of working in that market, meeting products like the one from Kirsten or the work from Shivani or any startup from Sena?
Yes, of course. The vision is to build technologies who are helping startups or other products or healthcare providers in enabling such technologies. For example, we have a health engagement platform which should enable diabetes apps, for example, which we do with a life science partner. We have also a platform, a foundation platform, which should allow integrating different data sources. However, we are not in the service business. That's not our core competence. So that's something that our partners or customers can do, and we are helping them here to enable them. And what you can see is that we have, for example, in the domain of oncology, several projects, and also for people who are coming only from software engineering background, it makes a difference whether you work, for example, on a new accounting system or on a system which can help treating cancer. And even if it's only a bit, the people are very passionate about that. So what we can really observe, and if you come to our teams, you will see a lot of people, I think it's also in your teams, this way, where the people want to work on the topic, so we decide to go there for the topic and not for technology, at least in our team.
Thank you. Back to you, Tony.
I'm just going to take a quick moment. I'm going to sound like a ranting crazy man potentially, and maybe I am anyway. But we're using the expression healthcare a lot, and I just wanted to point out for the audience that really most of what we're talking about right now is reactive disease care. Someone's got a problem, diabetes. I'll use diabetes as an example in a second. But you have something wrong, and then we have to try and fix it. And trying to fix something is never quite as good as not being ill or damaged in the first place. So diabetes is a great example of, I think, where technology really has two very divergent roles. One is in improving our reaction to the disease process and trying to monitor it better and manage it better. But the other part of technology is encouraging people to not get diabetes in the first place. And that may be through, again, regular moving your body, having better advice around diet and sort of things. So that to me is healthcare, is maintaining your health, caring about your health. And we tend to not think about that because the healthcare system, as we all know it, is this big monolithic hospital and doctors and CT scans and blood tests. So again, I think being able to kind of keep those split in your mind and ask yourself, is this truly healthcare? Can we spend some more money on truly preventing diseases, keeping our people healthier and more productive, and then also then be able to respond to people who do get sick or injured and be able to get them back in the game quickly. I think that's the role of our healthcare system.
Yeah, so just to add to that, if you read the Globe and Mail, which is our national newspaper this week, they profile one of our startups that's squarely in the wellness space named League. And the title of the article is Our Health and Wellness Benefits, the New Pension. And so employers used to count on insurance companies to do these interesting things called processing drug claims, and that was supposed to be health benefits. They're now getting really deep in innovation to keep their population and their workforce well. 40% of disability is mental illness in the workplace, just as one example, let alone diabetes. So to a point where there's a prediction that by 2030, healthcare will be free because it's going to be so vital for you to be participating in the workforce, because only when you're working are you paying taxes that allow society to prosper, that the employer will have to pay for all of your care as part of just being an employee, not this like weird benefit thing on the side. So it's becoming clear because, like you said, our formal sick system is designed for when you're not well, but there isn't really a place to invest in wellness that's concentrated. It's distributed in things like our education system, our water supply, our environmental factors, et cetera. And so the private markets, I think, is going to take it into their own hands. They're going to have to, or else we won't be able to actually have functioning jobs in society.
Question here from the audience.
When you ask a question, please say your name and your affiliation. Thank you.
I'm Naveed Nazir, working for Limasonics at the moment. But my question is generally directed to the panel. If I'm collecting my data through Fitbit or Apple Watch, how trustworthy is that considered by physicians? Because my impression is they discount that. They think it is fluff.
Who would like to answer?
Yeah, so I can maybe start that conversation. So I think the way things are currently laid out with commercial products, there's a misunderstanding in the communication when a patient comes into the clinic and is presenting this information in its raw format. I think that's when it gets discounted. But if we can introduce that information that you're collecting in the grander scheme of your health and provide an overall context snapshot of what that actually means for your health, I think clinicians will start to take that more seriously. So an example of that is if we're able to show at your 6-month appointment, overall, you've been sedentary, you're hypertensive, and you've gained a couple pounds, that provides a picture that can actually enable informed decision making when you're in the clinic. And I think that's where we're starting to move. And we've actually sat at the table with Apple discussing HealthKit and all these great technologies. And they're at the standpoint that we are giving you the tools to do it. It's up to organizations like ours to figure out how to make that an effective communication tool for clinical management. So I'll start there.
I'll quickly just wade in briefly as the doctor here. I think there's one more doctor in the room. But, we don't, as of November 20th, 2015, I don't think that the vast majority of us have the competencies to know what to do with that. We haven't been trained. It doesn't fit my paradigm. I'm not actually paid to get data from you. Thank you very much. I'm going to get it from a blood test that I order, or I'm going to do it my way. It's, you know, I tend to be, I don't tend to be, but many of my colleagues, it's a paternalistic system. And I think that, there is the question of how reliable is it? What's the pickup rate? I mean, I think that's still to be determined a little bit, but we just haven't incorporated it into our routine business. And I'm not, the system, as Zana's already said, is not designed currently to encourage me to care about your data, and it should be.
I have the impression Kai would like to add something.
Yeah, so I think there were first prototypes in that direction where you can see where we can integrate this data. For example, we have with Stanford Medical School a project ongoing where we integrate Apple healthcare data into a panel including the genomics data, so that we also bring together data from different sources. So it's not only the healthcare data from Apple, or let's say, the movement or the heart rate, but also including all the clinical history of a patient. And then it gives, I think, a lot of value for the treatment and for the diagnosis for the medical, because I think it's a new way a new data point, but you need to see it in correlation to all the existing data.
Anybody would like to respond? Okay, Tony, I would like to...
Here. Yeah, we have one more question here from Toronto. I'm going to pass on to you.
Okay.
My name is Vicky. I'm a postdoctoral student at the University of Toronto. My question is for Dr. Cray and Shivani. So from the perspective of maybe a diabetic patient who uses an insulin pen, so you've got, you take your blood glucose measurements, and then you also have to look at your calorie count for the food you're eating, and then maybe you go out with some friends, or you're looking at what you're eating there, and then you might want to factor in exercise, and maybe your blood glucose measurements fluctuate because of what you're doing or what you're eating, whereas most of the devices for blood glucose monitoring are just to take your blood sample at a specific moment in time. So the patient is kind of responsible for managing what they're eating, what they're doing, what they're exercising, and then you might have your machine for blood glucose, you might have your machine for calorie counting, and then you have some other documents where you note what you're eating or what you're exercising, like your Fitbit, and then you're like stuck with all these different technologies, and you have to maintain all these technologies. So I'm just curious as to, with the smartphone system or the different apps, are you thinking about integrating all these different types of things for the diabetic patient, including calorie counting and exercising and things like that?
May I start? Thank you for that question. Yes, indeed, we are currently programming these kind of downloadable other devices. So like Fitbit, for example, like other exercise. Our current blood glucose meter is able to get input for the carbohydrate you want to eat. So there is the opportunity or the possibility to also have an entry of carbohydrates you want to eat. And the basic question, or the answer that I have is, of course, we don't want to focus people with diabetes only on their glucose levels, because there is much more. People with type 2, for example, we have to measure their blood pressure, and their cholesterol, for example. So there is much more from a diabetic point of view to get the data, and the more data the patient as well as the physician has, the exacter or the more benefit there will be the therapy.
Okay.
To add to that, if I may, quickly, I think you've asked a very interesting question that I could talk about for hours, but I will say that the long-term vision is we have technologies that allow people to easily capture all of these behaviors, and then we're using the phone to, without burden, in the background, provide insights when it matters, so that when you are going out to eat, we can remind you, hey, you know, last time you came to this particular location, you tended to be hyperglycemic afterwards. So at a more concrete level, we are doing this currently. So one of our mobile applications, Bant, allows you to pull in your Fitbit data, take photos of your meal, wirelessly pull in your blood glucose reading, and gives you a snapshot saying, hey, when you're sedentary after your dinners, it tends to be really bad for you. And we're processing that data using algorithms to give insight, taking away that burden from you having to sit there with this massive log sheet trying to draw relationships onto how to manage your chronic illness. There's a lot of work to be done in this space in terms of interoperability. You know, I'm sure Emperor has much to say on this topic. But there is a lot of burden associated with these various devices. You're right to say that. But I think we're headed in the right direction as to how to handle the data coming from those devices and processing it in an effective way.
We have one quick comment from Dr. Ross.
Like chatty Kathy here. I just wanted to caution us all, again, I'm just going to sound like maybe a bit of a wet blanket, but I think we have to be mindful of the people who are out there who are getting diabetes. May not be, I'm looking around the room here, it's a pretty healthy looking group. Likelihood of diabetes relatively small. Rural Canada, people who don't have smartphones and all those sort of things, we have to think about how do we get them involved and give them the competencies to use those gizmos so that they're comfortable and actually motivated to do it. So I think there's some change management to keep in mind.
And I'll just add, most people who have diabetes have other illnesses, so I have a real problem with point solutions, even if they're integrated. They could have COPD, they could have kidney failure, usually mental illness. So it's designing for my life, not for each component of my illness.
Christian is
from
really
this side, so over to you.
Thank you. Christian is really getting excited here on the podium, but I said before we can't go into details of every aspect, but I would like, Tony, I would like to make sure that everybody who's interested into Christian's work gets the address or that you make contacts over there. And me, myself, I would have many questions to go on with this podium now, but this is also a networking conference, and I want to give everybody the possibility to have a coffee, talk to the person he's interested to. I want to thank both my podiums here in Berlin, Kai and Christian, and in Toronto, John, Shivani, and Zaina, for a very interesting discussion. I'm really sorry we have to stop now because I've prepared for this conference over the last 2 weeks, and I get the impression I speak now your language, but still we have to stop talking. And I see you back here, let's say 5:05, which is 11:05 in Toronto, and then we will talk about more all these brand new technologies and so on, what it means politically and how we can regulate that. I want to thank you all very much and see you back in 25 minutes.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, hello Toronto, guten Abend Berlin. Ich würde jetzt gerne wieder anfangen. Christina, sind noch Leute draußen? Okay. Tony, how are we doing in Toronto?
Doing well. If we could please continue here on our side. Selena, can I ask you to come over? Perfect. Most people are back in the room here. So if you want to go ahead, Alex?
Okay, I will. Hope you can see me now. So welcome back to the second part of our discussion after we had now a very insightful view of what's happening on the technological side of e-health, what's happening in the future, what we can actually make use of. It's now the time to talk about what politics can do to support e-health, which kind of regulations we are facing, and as you know, I'm working for a children foundation, and I wonder the whole time, what we talk about here today, is this regulations for them when they're older, when they're sort of patients themselves, or is it something that, let's say, a middle-aged person like me can still sort of experience when getting older, going through it, and which kind of regulations I would like policy to take care of. And we will, like before, start with two presentations. We have Professor Brauns here in Berlin, who will start, followed by Selina Lee Anderson in Toronto, and then have a panel discussion followed after. So I would like you, Professor Braun, to take now the stage. You're representing the Deutsche Gesellschaft für Telemedizin, the German Association for Telemedicine, and you will tell us about the challenges and changes for healthcare. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tan. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it's an honor and pleasure to be here. I'm trying, or I shall try, to explain the situation of telemedicine in Germany and the perspectives within the next years. Okay, I'll just leave briefly through the agenda and come to the first point. I think it's important to keep in mind what telemedicine is. It's the application of modern information and communication technologies in healthcare to provide concrete medical services across distances. Personally, I prefer to speak of specific telemedical applications rather than of telemedicine. Telemedicine is a very broad spectrum ranging from prevention over diagnostics, treatment, to aftercare, telemonitoring, and other things. I think one fundamental aspect of telemedicine, it's an organizational instrument. I will add, in my view, it's a revolutionary organizational instrument. Why? At present, two paradigms form the basis of the organization of healthcare, not only in Germany at present. The medical expertise is bound to the person of the medical doctor, and that should stay like this. And the medical expertise is bound and thus limited to the location of the medical doctor. Either the patient is coming to see the medical doctor in order to get services, or, that's rather the exception, the medical doctor is coming to the patient. And as I mentioned already, the telemedicine is overcoming this. In the future, major parts of medical expertise are available across distances, regardless of the location of the medical doctor, and across frontiers. So in this view, telemedicine is also a contribution to internationalization of healthcare. Telemedicine is an organizational instrument capable of revolutionizing the organization of present healthcare systems. Did anybody of you imagine a couple of years or several years ago that Google and Apple will become major providers of healthcare? I think nobody did, at least I didn't think of this. Some remarks to the basis. legal basis in Germany, in constitutional law, we have the right, everybody in Germany, of equality or homogeneity of living conditions across Germany. That applies also to healthcare. Regardless where I'm living, I have the right to get the same quality of healthcare provisions in Bavaria, in Berlin, in Brandenburg, or wherever I live. Professional law, interdiction of remote treatment, but not absolutely. It's an interdiction to treat a patient exclusively at distance, meaning that telemedicine is allowed, but it is forbidden if a medical doctor is treating patients exclusively at distance. Data security and data protection is a major issue, liability, and legislation on medical products, medical devices. I was using the wrong points. The technological basis on which we are working at present is availability of broadband network all over Germany, interoperability standards, and compatibility of terminal devices. Financial basis, remuneration of telemedical services. In the ambulance sector, there's no remuneration, if not at the national level, the Union of Medical Doctors with the National Organization of the Mandatory Health Insurance agree on the definition of a service and its remuneration. At present, there's no telemedical service in the ambulance sector which has an ABM cipher, as we call it. So no medical service is remunerated regularly. There's many projects, I will come back to this, but regularly there's no service in the ambulance sector which is remunerated. In the hospital sector, it's different. The mandatory health insurance organizations negotiate individually with each hospital a budget, and within the budget, a hospital can finance whatever it wants. So if a hospital is interested, let's say, for example, in teleradiology, they can take their money, invest in teleradiology, and install a teleradiology network with other hospitals. Challenges. I just want to mention one challenge, the demographic development in Germany. The percentage of elderly people will increase by approximately 30% within the next 10, 15 years, while at the same time the working population will decrease by approximately 20%. We will see not only an increase of elderly multimorbid patients, but also an increase in chronic diseases. And since the working population is decreasing, we will have less physicians and other clinical staff. Medical offices will concentrate in urban regions, leading to deficits in rural, especially economically weak regions. For example, around Berlin, in Brandenburg, very often you have to travel 50, 60 kilometers to find a specialist if you need a specialist, or sometimes even more. So, hopefully by the end I will learn which button to push. Consequences, as I mentioned, decrease of population in rural areas, especially in economically weak regions, low density of population of physicians, and limited access to specialized expertise, because it doesn't make sense for a population of, let's say, 100 people to have a cardiologist, or in a hospital with 100 beds and 2 or 3 stroke patients per year to have a stroke unit. Telemedicine makes major parts of medical expertise available across distances, thus contributing to healthcare services close to the patient. Telemedicine makes specific medical competence available also in less densely populated remote areas, thus improving the quality of healthcare in these regions. It avoids long waits for patients, is making more efficient use of staff, thus contributing to more efficient and less expensive healthcare services. And last not least, telemedicine is making staff economies and could be part of a strategy to compensate the foreseeable shortage of medical staff. So telemedicine allows a different and innovative organization of our healthcare services in Germany. But you have to bear in mind, it might have impact on the relation between medical doctor and patient. It is changing this relation. It is also changing the relation between medical colleagues. Where are we in Germany? No nationwide telematic infrastructure, but in combination with the rollout of the electronic patient card, which is taking place now, we will have nationwide, national telematic infrastructure. Up till now, evidence-based studies are required for telemedical applications. This doesn't make sense if traditional medical method is offered via modern information and communication technology. There is no evidence-based study necessary because the method has been evaluated and it's only provided in a different way, and it doesn't change the method. These requirement, evidence-based studies, takes a lot of time and is very costly. And since it's supposed to be paid by the providers of telemedical applications, it is very difficult for small and middle-sized companies who are very active in this area to finance such studies. Terminal devices of different manufacturers are often not compatible. We have approximately 250 different projects in Germany in more than 100 locations in different specialties. Only one telemedicine application up till now is remunerated as a regular service, is defined. If you continue this way in 2050, we will have 3 telemedical applications in Germany remunerated. As I mentioned already, because of different financing structures, we have an increasing number of applications in the hospital sector, but a low penetration in the ambulant and intersectoral sectors. Why is this so? I think the major problem is not legal issues, it's not data protection, although it's widely discussed. And it's a low acceptance and innovation skepticism among the medical profession, especially in the ambulant sector. Telemedicine means cooperation, means more transparency. The colleague might take note of what I am doing and probably be critical about it. It's lack of remuneration. And as I mentioned already, the changes of the relation medical doctor and patient result also in a sort of uneasiness in the medical profession to face telemedicine. Proof of evidence I've mentioned already, unclear, insufficient completed financial provision I've mentioned already, unclear contradictory interests of important players, high quality standards, a lack of or too low remuneration. But I'm rather optimistic because long-term trends force or work in favor of telemedicine. Modern devices are easier to manage have a better performance. And this is also true for healthcare. The younger generation is increasingly IT affine. That is also true for medical doctors. And the medical profession is opening up and getting occupied or taking care and discussing telemedicine. They are more open-minded. An important point is the feminization of the medical profession at the Y generation. Women tend to prefer teamwork and family-friendly structures, and telemedicine is an instrument to combine more easily work and family. The demographic developments are pushing for telemedicine, and the ambassador mentioned already the e-health law, which is going to be passed during the next weeks. Government and parliament in Germany are pushing for telemedicine. So, conclusion, telemedicine is an instrument to face the challenges of our healthcare system in Germany. Long-term trends, which I described already, will overcome the far widespread skepticism and is working in favor of telemedicine, but it doesn't come from itself. We have to fight for it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Hans. Before we turn now over to Selina, I want to especially ask in Toronto, because this is very much about the German healthcare system and its implications, if there are direct questions to the presentation.
So I'll give back to you, Alex.
Okay, no questions from that side. I think I would wait with my questions when we are all together on the podium, if you don't mind, and would hand now over to Selina. Thank you again, and welcome, Selina. Selina comes from British Columbia, by the way, a province I very much love. And you're going to talk about e-health in British Columbia, regulatory overview, lessons learned, and strategies for the future. And we are very much looking forward what you have developed over the last 8 years in your province. Selina, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Appreciate the warm welcome. Matthias, do my slides? Okay, great. So as Alex mentioned, I'm based in Vancouver, so I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of West Coast experience over the last a few years as how e-health initiatives have been introduced. So BC has made quite a lot of progress over the last few years on its e-health initiatives. It's kind of carried out sort of regular reviews of priorities and program objectives and adapted the strategies accordingly. The latest document was kind of set out in 2014, February, which was called Setting Priorities for the BC Health System, which set out a number of strategies and priorities. And it's sort of interesting to note that two of those strategies, one of them was sort of a call for more skilled change management. I think that's a theme we'll probably see throughout our discussion today, just because of the massive, the complexity of the system and all the interlocking pieces. So there's a lot of complexity. So change management is, you see a lot of those keywords around. Also information management and technology, the availability and accessibility of different kinds of information to patients and healthcare providers. So just before I get in, I just wanted to highlight some of the success stories in BC. One of them is sort of the Healthy Families BC website, which is part of their sort of Web 2.0 strategy, which kind of goes beyond just providing information to patients in that kind of preventative healthcare space to actually allowing people to interact with each other, community blogs, information sharing, and those kinds of things. So that's kind of what they call the sort of Web 2.0. So it's the new generation of social networking and healthcare. They also successfully set up a First Nation Health Authority, to address that particular segment of the population, which is a bit more vulnerable for healthcare prevention strategies and treating them in remote areas. I understand there's about 500,000 people in BC who are now able to access their lab results online, so that's a pretty big achievement. And as well, we have an interoperable electronic health record initiative, which has about 10,000 active users at the moment, so that's a success story as well. But there's a lot of challenges still to be overcome. I think a lot of common themes that see here with our German colleagues: slow alignment among all the different health departments and users, as well as buy-in. It's difficult to get buy-in from a lot of the users of the system. Limited capacity within the system itself to deliver a system-wide change. And it's the whole accessibility issue, quality and availability of data. Okay.
Which slide should we go to?
The first slide, just the agenda, would be great. Thank you. So today I was going to talk a bit about, I guess, providing a Canadian context. I know we've been talking about sort of very specific areas of sort of healthcare, but in our discussions in a preparation for this meeting, Alex asked me to provide kind of an overview of Canadian context and how it sort of works with our insurance and our system generally for the non-Canadians in the room. So I will look at that, and then I'll kind of look a bit more detail in BC, just provide a high-level overview of the kinds of initiatives, particularly with respect to e-health, who the key players are, how the system works generally, so you can see what the system looks like typically at a provincial level, and also lessons learned so far and strategies perhaps for the future that we can maybe engage people in the room to talk about as well. So, Alex, if you could change it to the next slide. Thank you. So, before I get into sort of specific expenditures, so for the sort of non-Canadians in the room or those who aren't familiar with our healthcare system, basically federal and provincial governments share responsibility for delivering healthcare in Canada. So we have a national program, which is universal healthcare. It's referred to often as Medicare. And it's made up, basically, it's not a national program in that it's its own program, but it has 13 interlocking provincial and territorial health insurance plans. So they all share common sort of features and as well as basic levels of coverage. So the main legislation in Canada governing healthcare is the Canada Health Act, and it sets out the principles that govern healthcare in the Canadian system, which include universality, accessibility, portability, comprehensiveness, and public administration. So those are the foundation on which our healthcare system is built on. So the Canada Health Act also sets out the provincial and territorial health insurance, the criteria that the provincial and territorial health plans need to meet in order to obtain their federal contributions via that Canada Health Transfer. So they'll be eligible for federal funding, and the Canada Health Act sets out the criteria for that. In terms of the organizational level, most provinces have regionalized healthcare, which means that the region is going to be responsible for the health needs of the residents. So the province will oversee, the sort of main strategies and set the policy priorities, and it'll be the regions that actually deliver meet the health needs of its residents. So regional health authorities can own the hospitals, run the hospitals, take care of long-term care and home care, also responsible, and they're accountable for efficiency and quality in the system. On its current trajectory, I think this is a similar case with many countries in the world, that our health system is seen as being unsustainable if it sort of continues on its current path. And that's because costs are increasing and business as usual will not sort of meet the growing demand. So at the moment, healthcare Canada, spending in Canada is projected to reach about $219 billion, which works out to, on average, about $6,100 per Canadian. Spending by province ranges sort of just a little under $6,000 in BC to $7,000 in Newfoundland and Labrador. So healthcare spending now represents about 11% of our GDP, which is quite significant. And I thought it would be interesting to kind of see what the top 3 cost drivers are. So hospitals, represent the bulk of it. Drugs, and then physicians come in third. Next slide, please. So it's hard to sort of see this map, but it's just kind of a map of different costs by province. And I just want to give a shout out to the Canada Health InfoWay. We've got some folks in the room that we can chat a bit more on during the panel session. But the Canada Health InfoWay is an important sort of player. It's sort of the national umbrella organization which facilitates the interoperability of existing sort of federal, provincial, and territorial electronic health initiatives. So they are a very key player, and it was established back in 2001, and I think Mike will be able to tell us a bit more about it. Next slide, please, Alex. I thought also OECD was sort of interesting. They published sort of how does Canada compare to other countries in terms of healthcare spending. So you can see that average, it's sort of, this I believe is in US dollars, so it's Canada's in the middle there, and Germany is about 4,920 per person. But it's about the same amount of GDP, it's about 11% of spending. So Canada is actually behind most OECD nations in the redesign of its health systems. It also ranks near the bottom of OECD nations in terms of quality and outcomes of healthcare system. Next slide, please. So just moving to BC. So our population, just look at demographics because those are important drivers. It's about 4.6 million people. And of course, you know, as with most jurisdictions, we have an aging population. And life expectancy is increasing. So those are driving a lot of challenges in the system. In BC, healthcare costs represent about 40% of the government's sort of budget spending, and the revenue sort of comes from a mix of provincial and federal taxes, fees, and as well as other government sources. Next slide, please. So some of the challenges you'll see are very similar to the ones in Germany. So changing demographics, aging population, the continuous need to update facilities, technologies, and equipment. Also, you know, new diseases. You know, a lot of our system is focused on acute care, short-term, and not necessarily focused on chronic illnesses. And we're trying to shift to more preventative regime, which requires more education, health promotion, and disease prevention. So all of these factors are together creating pressures on not only BC's system, but other systems as well. So one of the initiatives of sort of eHealth is to move information online to reduce delays and improve the quality of information that's available to health service providers. Next slide, please. So there are several pieces of legislation in BC that sort of deal with healthcare. So the Public Health Act is sort of the overarching piece of legislation. And then there are specific sort of legislation under that to help deal with different aspects of it. And then there's one specifically for eHealth, which deals with the protection of information. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, in BC, it's sort of organized, it's the regional entities that kind of deliver the services, but the BC Ministry of Health is the main policy authority. And then under that is the health authorities that each works with them. So there are 5 regional health authorities and a First Nation health authorities. There's the Health Insurance BC, which kind of administers the medical coverage. There's also the Provincial Health Officer and various colleges, boards, and commissions, as well as private sector vendors as well. So these are all players in the healthcare system. Next slide, please. So currently in BC, personal health information is held in different places. So records could be held by the doctors and pharmacists and opticians, and those ones are sort of will not typically be moved to an electronic health system. All of this personal health information is protected by legislation, and there's a phased implementation of BC's electronic health records, which started back in 2009, and it's an ongoing process. So as patients encounter the system, records of that will be stored on the system. That's sort of the idea. One of the challenges, and I think that's similar in other jurisdictions, is that BC's healthcare system is not supported by a single information management or information technology organization. So each organization will have its own systems that's responsible for its own support. So that's one of the alignment issues in trying to bring together those pieces of technology and databases. So also each different organization, because it's regionally based, will have different challenges in that you have different demographics in each region and different demands. So even though all the parties are working toward the same goal, there are different organizational priorities at different times. So that's one of the challenges in terms of trying to bring it together as a system-wide change. Next slide, please. So in terms of information management and information technology priorities in BC, as I mentioned, we have a Web sort of 2.0 strategy, which aims for preventative and taking more personal responsibility for your health. There's also a priority to develop province-wide system of integrated primary and primary care, and that sort of goes to electronic medical records as well as the telehealth solutions. Another priority is providing high quality and accessible acute care, and that goes to clinical information systems. And then finally, the whole initiative around provincial electronic health records has also been set as a priority. Next slide, please. It's a bit hard to see for those in the room, but components of eHealth, there are different sort of components that make up the whole eHealth initiatives that cover the whole range of services, whether it's diagnostics, drugs, record keeping, as well as sort of physician information technology and lab solutions. So all of these, and telehealth, these are all sort of interacting with the system and form part of the eHealth initiative. Next slide, please. So in BC, the Ministry of Health is the overarching provincial organization. There's also a Health Leadership Council, which is basically the senior governance committee in the health sector, and they kind of provide direction to the regions on priorities. So after certain reviews, they decided to implement a new sort of governance model last year. And this is called the Standing Committee of Information Management, Information Technology. And this entity is kind of responsible to provide direction and guidance to the supporting kind of committees and working groups. So underneath it, there are subcommittees. So there's, if you're familiar with Canadian, we like to have committees on things and talk about things quite a lot. So the responsibility of the Standing Committee is to create other standing committees for key functional areas, including information privacy and security, health solution deliveries, and as well as a health technology strategy. So these are all ongoing initiatives at this time. Next slide, please. So eHealth in BC, so privacy is a huge issue as in most jurisdictions. So there's a specific legislation that protects health information. So health information, of course, is also protected under the broader privacy legislation. But the Electronic sort of Health Protection Act sort of sets the parameters of who can access that information. For example, physicians, nurses, and administrators will have different levels of access according to the kind of information they need. And at this point, there was one market sort of constraint that is unique to Canada, which I wanted to kind of just talk about a little bit. So a lot of the data legislation, privacy protection legislation in Canada requires that private information of Canadians be stored in Canada. So that actually, because Canada is such a small market, there's very limited ability for the storage hosting solutions in Canada, high quality ones. So that means that, for example, the BC government, although it would like to adopt cloud solutions, its options are very limited because a lot of those providers are US providers, for example, which might end up in a cloud in the US, which would violate our privacy laws. So that's a unique sort of Canadian constraint in terms of that we don't have those kinds of servers here to store information. And it'd be interesting to hear Michael's thoughts on how to address those issues. Next slide, please. So in BC, the Auditor General has carried out 2 reviews. One was a review of the Panorama public health system most recently this year, and then in 2009 looked at sort of the electronic health record implementation in BC. So Panorama, just for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is an information technology system that's implemented to kind of manage information around sort of communicable disease outbreaks and immunization programs across Canada. So this, as I understand, has been fully implemented in BC. So the Auditor General looked at the implementation of that program, and these are the kinds of the issues they had identified. So system stability issues, cost overruns, delays in delivery of that technology, also lack of an overall communications strategy for health professionals, and the absence of kind of measurable objectives. So these were sort of things that they had flagged. So I think whenever you have sort of large and complex, IT projects, there are also a lot of risks associated with that. So the issues will be around sort of system quality, budget, and timelines. And I think that's just very much a sort of project management issue. Okay, next slide, please. So just to kind of wrap up, so Canadian systems kind of need a fundamental overhaul to improve quality, access, and outcomes and sustainability. So I think the messaging here is that basically process innovations are helpful, but there is need for a larger sort of system-wide transformation. So, and Canadians have done really well in sort of creating those innovations, but we are lagging in terms of adopting them and implementing them in an effective way. And I think I'm going to end on that note, if there's, and leave it to the panel discussion.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Selina. Against all German tradition, I was very easy now about the time, but you did us such a favor explaining also the Canadian health system to us that I just gave you an extra time. Thank you very much. I would like now to invite to the podium Edward Brown from Ontario Telemedicine Network and Michael Green, President of Canada Health Infoway, and Tony, if you join them again. And I'm going to be sitting here with Hans Jochen in Berlin. And please show us again the sun in Toronto. It's already dark in Berlin. It's going to keep us awake. All right. Thank you very much. Before we go back to you, Selina, and to Hans Jochen, I would like to welcome our new members of the panel, Michael and Ed. And I would like to start with you, Michael, because your organization has been already mentioned. And also in my preparation, I found it very interesting what you do, because, of course, I'm only working on this topic since very recently, but I didn't find any sort of comparative organization here in Germany to such a scale. So if you could explain what you do, and before we go into more detail of your work. Thank you.
Yes, certainly happy to. So Michael Green, CEO, President of Canada Health Infoway. And Selina talked a little bit about Infoway. We are an organization that was founded in 2001 by the then Liberal government. And we're set up as a not-for-profit kind of arm's length agency which gets its funding from the federal government. And all the provinces and territories are members of Infoway. And Selina mentioned that the government provides, or the federal government provides, a transfer payment to all the provinces for healthcare. But over and above that, the government also likes to fund specific programs. And so it uses independent arm's length agencies, such as Infoway, to help the government look at trying to implement some strategies across Canada. For example, we specifically focus on the area of digital health. And so it's a way that the federal government can kind of help push and promote some Canada-wide initiatives. And so what do we do? So our mission is to promote the adoption of innovative digital health technology, and the goal is to improve health for Canadians. we've had $2.1 billion worth of funding so far, and of that we invest 75 cents in the dollar in specific projects. And those projects, we set the business criteria, the milestones and the goals, and we pay out on achievement of those. Our mandate has been to focus on, or the original mandate was to focus on the EHR. So when Infoway was founded in 2001, there wasn't an EHR. None of the provinces or territories had any kind of digital health or health IT policy groups. And so it was a kind of early day of setting up that vision. And what the focus was basically to make the EHR, electronic health record, available to all Canadians. Up until now, we feel that this is around about 93% available, and that includes drug information systems, diagnostic imaging, public health, telemedicine, and also hospital discharge reports. The focus of the last couple of years has been on physician EMRs, so in family primary care practices, and we've been kind of really focusing on programs to promote EMRs, and basically that program now, we've got about 75% of family physicians using EMRs. However, up to date, the impact from a patient perspective has not been that visible, because a lot of these activities have been involved with getting the institutions professionals connected. And so now our focus is more on looking at patient access and sustainability. And we have programs in place looking at personal health record, e-booking, referral across the system. I mentioned a couple of those programs we've been supporting, BC, for example. And so that's our future going forward. And apart from the funding, we do a lot of other things to kind of really help with the change management and the implementation, because technology is just one issue. And that covers things like certifying solutions, change management, program management, helping to evaluate benefits of what technologies, the benefits they'll provide from a clinical, financial point of view. We do a lot of work in standards and interoperability, because it's obviously important. And then also in the areas like privacy and security, looking at those, trying to kind of coordinate a provincial and territorial response so that we have more common approach towards these policy areas. And then finally, really thought leadership in technology, best practice and policy. So that basically is a kind of brief overview of Infoway.
Thank you. Just on logistics, could you pull the microphones a bit closer to you?
Oh, sorry.
So we hear you better. Thank you. And doing this work now since more than 12 years, what are the lessons learned? Also, if you think about that we are building up a similar system here now, which you could sort of recommend to Germany.
Yes, happy to. And there are some other similar organizations. I mean, one that is probably most famous is the ONC in the US, the Office of the National Coordinator, which has played a key role in the Meaningful Use program. And that office has really had the ability to kind of provide funding, on specific projects that related to digitizing patient records, and have been very much directed at physician incentives, as well as some disincentives for hospitals and physicians if they don't adopt the technology. But I think one of the key things is that when Infoway was set up, it took a couple of years really for the organization to really get to grips with its strategy. And I believe that it's very important to have a solid strategy. And part of that is to make sure that you really also go out and speak to all the different stakeholders, and whether those are the provinces or their equivalents, the payers, the providers, but most importantly to involve the clinicians and patients and all the other professions that are involved in the process. Then I think it's very important to have a clear goal of what you really want to achieve and how you're going to achieve it, and then how that will be implemented. And once you've kind of come together with that, you need to kind of socialize that, get the agreement, really, and then work closely with the jurisdictions and the hospitals and regions to kind of implement the program. And of course, it's very important as well because these programs need to be driven with resources, that you have the appropriate kind of financial resources in place. And, I think some lessons have been learned. Sylvia mentioned Selina, mentioned the Panorama program, for example, in British Columbia, which was an early version of one of the programs we're involved in public health. And British Columbia was a province that took a leadership position, the first province to implement the public health system. And I think that, this was not an easy process, but from it, a lot of lessons were learned about how to scale very big projects, the importance of having the proper governance and project management in place. Having said that, I think BC, recently in response to the auditor's report said that, the system does work now, and so they are getting benefits from the system. But I think, we certainly have lessons to learn, and in terms of the usability of these solutions, because in the end, there's a lot of very good technology, but if the technology is not easy to use, if it doesn't provide a value, then to get physicians and people to adopt the technology is going to be very hard. So as well as funding, I think any organization like Infoway has a big role to play in how one should effectively implement the technology. And then because we operate across a lot of jurisdictions, we're able to help best practice. So we run a lot of best practice seminars with various different groups, from clinicians to administrators to technologists, really helping them meet together and talk about how they've overcome certain obstacles and so on.
Thank you. When we get later to the general discussion, I want to come back to that topic of human factor. And also I would like you, Hans-Jochen, to reflect what has just been said on the German situation and where we are on the strategy to a more general e-health policy. But now I would like to turn over to Ed, CEO of Ontario Telemedicine Network. First of all, congratulations. I've read you won the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Award for what you do on e-health. We consider the royal family in England always partly ours, so congratulations also from that side. What does she think of the topic?
What does the Queen think? Well, I was speaking to her yesterday, and I'm sure she's in favor.
Yeah, she's also meeting the demographic change age where it might take place. Let's go back to that, but please tell us a little bit, what does Ontario Telemedicine Network do? And perhaps you can reflect it with the general, what has just been described by Michael, to create more awareness and acceptance of e-health.
Sure. So thanks, Alex. Hello, everybody. By the way, thank you, Professor Bronze, for that great overview. I think a lot of the issues that we've been facing in Ontario and Canada are almost identical. Also, thank you, McCarthy Tétrault. Actually, I'm a physician, and McCarthy Tétrault actually defends doctors when they have lawsuits. So they're actually the only lawyers that we actually like. Okay. And of course, Michael's one of our big funders, so I got to thank you for everybody here. That's it. Perfect. Okay. Ontario, just the context, we're here in Ontario, very, very similar policy environment to British Columbia. They have better skiing, otherwise the health systems are pretty close. And OTN is Ontario Telemedicine Network. We're actually a not-for-profit, independent corporation in Ontario, but we are the agent of our provincial government to deliver telemedicine and virtual healthcare in Ontario. So our job is to make it happen, is to look for things that have value, that support the healthcare system, and figure out a way to get those things adopted across the healthcare system. So we were formed in 2006. We were the merger of 3 independent regional networks that came into one organization. We've been working hard ever since then. My definition of telemedicine is kind of the same as virtual healthcare. which really is about, how do we improve access to care using information and communication technology? How do we enhance the efficiency of health providers? How do we enable them to collaborate with each other, with their patients, with caregivers? And the new piece of virtual healthcare, which is really about people in their homes and how we engage people, support them, monitor them when we have to, but really help them to live a better life in place at home. So using technology for all of those applications is our mandate. So at OTN, there's really three things that we do. We provide some telemedicine services. We do a lot of promotion of adoption and change management, as you heard, both for providers and for organizations and for regions. And we look for valuable innovation that's out there in virtual healthcare and look at how we can work with the health sector to actually make it happen. So if I come back to those three things, just to give you an idea of the service mix, we've been doing rural video conferencing for a very long time. Actually, the history in Ontario goes back to the mid-90s. And we think we have one of the largest collaborative networks of rural healthcare anywhere. Last year, there were about 480,000 clinical video conferencing consultations between specialists in urban centers and patients in rural centers, avoiding travel. If you look at the travel that was avoided last year, it's about 260 million kilometers of travel avoided, and that's enough to go to the moon and back 330 times. Okay, so it's an awful lot of distance. And in Northern Ontario, our health system actually subsidizes patients to travel there for healthcare. So we avoided over $60 million in travel costs last year. And since our base budget is about $22 million, we think we are a profit center for the taxpayers of Ontario. So that's our main application. Of course, we also do other things. We do e-consultation, which is provider-to-provider communication. So a primary care provider can ask a question electronically of a specialist and get an answer back. For example, if you had a rash and I was your primary care doc, I could take a picture of that. I could send that to a dermatologist, get an answer back electronically. And the brilliance there is really about cost and about timing. So instead of waiting weeks or sometimes months to see that dermatologist, the average time is now 2 days in terms of getting the consultation back. And we're really extending that into a province-wide program. And of course, the final frontier is the home. And we've been working quite hard with Infoway actually as a partner and the provincial government in Ontario to find patients with congestive heart failure, chronic lung disease, and to give them technology in their home to monitor their health, match that with a nurse coach who supports the patient. And that program has had really dramatic results. So we've actually reduced hospitalization by about 60% for those patients, reduced emergency department visits by about the same amount. Very dramatic results in terms of improving their health and outcomes. We're putting all of this stuff together. Technology is moving very quickly. So we put all this stuff together in one place. We call it the hub, and it's really the provider portal to all of these services. So providers can use single sign-on to get in there. They can do their video conferencing. They can schedule. They can send an invite to a patient, so they can actually video conference with a patient in their home from the hub and do all their other telemedicine work within that one place. And of course, we've moved from private network and hardware-based video conferencing to very much software-based video conferencing using the internet, making it faster, better, and cheaper over time. So that's the service area. On the adoption side, we have a team of folks. They're almost like sales folks who are out there around the province working directly with providers and organizations. We also have a consulting team that works with academic health facilities and other major organizations to build telemedicine into their actual business plans. So we want to banish the technology plan. We want to make technology a business process support for their core vision, their core goals for their strat plan. And that's really an important part of taking telemedicine out of the basement and making it just a part of everyday healthcare delivery. And finally, the most exciting application for us, number 3, is really the patient, engaging the patient. And we're looking at ways right now to take applications, things like automated coaching for diabetes, mental health, social networking sites, management for people in the home for chronic kidney disease. And we're looking at ways to do rapid evaluation of those and to be able to procure those on behalf of the healthcare system to make them available should they be successful. So we'll evaluate them, we'll pilot them, and if they're successful, we're going to look at how we can scale the important and valuable applications through the healthcare system. Just to make it simple for you, I realized the other day that we actually have something in common with Uber. I'm sorry, my last sentence. I got the time clock here. Because Uber is the largest taxi company in the world that doesn't own a taxi. Airbnb is the largest vacation rental place, and they don't own any vacation properties. And that's kind of what we do. We think we're one of the largest telemedicine facilitators in the world. We actually deliver zero healthcare services. We support the providers, we match make them with the folks who want their services, we support them with different technologies, but we actually deliver nothing in terms of actual healthcare delivery. I'll stop there.
Thank you. I'm going to come back especially to your last point, comparing your organization to Uber and other of these Silicon Valley originally driven new companies, just to understand, like you have the Ontario network, a telemedicine network, you have one in every province in Canada, and how do you sort of guarantee that you're not building up different technical standards in each province?
Sure. So there is telemedicine in every province, but as you've seen from Selina's presentation, every province runs its own healthcare system. So I would say every province has a different approach. Some of them have no centralized approach to it, and others have program leads within their ministries of health. I think Ontario is unique in having an independent organization that's an agent of government doing the work. We do collaborate, though. So at least for things like video conferencing standards, we regularly connect with pretty much every province on a regular basis. I think as you go into the bold new frontier of new technologies, that may become more of an issue, but because telemedicine is still such a green field, we essentially are calling out the standards as we develop these new applications.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to ask Hans-Jochen now about the German situation after we learned so much now about Canada, before going back to Selina and then opening the general panel. Hans-Jochen, we learned now a lot. The provinces, obviously, in Canada have a lot to say in health policy, and everything I could read now about how we build up telemedicine networks in Germany, I don't see a general sort of federal approach, and I didn't see a real sort of a province taking charge or being leader. Like, I'm Bavarian. Normally, I was quite disappointed that Bavaria wasn't leading in telemedicine or anything concerning IT. Normally we are. So why is that? Is it because of our insurance and all these different players that nobody can really sort of make charge of and make a plan and get it done?
Well, there's different points to it. First of all, Germans tend to be perfect. If they do something, they want to do it perfectly. And to do something perfectly needs more time than just introducing something by trial and error. But to be serious, in Germany is not in the area of healthcare, not structured only as a federal state with federal government and regional government, but self-administration is a very important part of it. A lot of competences have been delegated from the federal government or the regional government to self-governing bodies of the medical profession. For example, professional law for medical doctors is not discussed and decided by the federal government, by the German parliament, but by the Federal Chamber of Medical Doctors. Or, as I mentioned, remuneration for any ambulant medical service, not only the telemedicine, is discussed and decided by the so-called Bewertungsausschuss, composed of representatives of the mandatory health insurance organizations and the medical doctors. And to give you an example of power of the self-administrative bodies, the German Parliament in 2010 passed a law urging or forcing the Bewertungsausschuss, responsible for defining medical services and remuneration, to decide on telemedical services up until the 31st of March 2013. If I'm correct, that's more than 2 years ago, and nothing happened. In a certain way, the Bewertungsausschuss didn't care. And what we also lack, and this would be a task of the federal government, is a national strategy. Politically, government and the political parties in the federal parliament are in favor of telemedicine and are pushing for telemedicine. For example, I mentioned this law in 2010. Within the next weeks, the e-health law, representing also the will of the government and the parliament to improve and to force medical bodies to implement telemedicine, will be passed. But if we don't convince the medical profession because of its autonomy, we will not get anywhere with telemedicine.
Thank you. And going back to Toronto, by the way, very sorry that we always talk to your bags. Selina, we talked about that it's a lot of regulation, but to me it also seems as if regulation which has to be changed, but it's also mainly a change of mindsets. And I wanted to ask you, apart from the technical work, what did you make to get a change of mindset in British Columbia?
Thanks for the question, Alex. Yeah, I mean, I think definitely sort of beyond the regulatory change. I mean, the system, in order, I think, to achieve that kind of system-wide change really requires an overhaul in thinking and a new kind of approach to things. So I think it's really talking to the people on the ground. It's really about knowing the history of the organization and will help you sort of avoid any potential difficulties as they come up, and also increase the buy-in, because it's the actual people on the ground in the system who are users of the system, whether it's physicians, patients, or the healthcare providers, administrators. You need to get their buy-in to it's one thing to provide a usable system, but then you actually have to get them to use it. So I think engaging sort of physicians in the process, engaging patients and their families for that whole idea of, you know, we're moving towards a more patient-centered system that kind of Ed talked about in terms of focusing and engaging them. But strong leadership also. These kinds of things you need sort of visionary thinkers, and I think there are probably people in the system who do have that vision, who are thinking sort of big picture, long term, who have passion, there's a mission, who have an organizational strategy in mind, as well as, you know, they seek continuous feedback, because these are ongoing changes that are needed, and you have to constantly, I think, reflect, measure, report on what you're seeing, and that's kind of a fair, objective way of looking at what you've achieved in the process, as well as standards. I mean, just to build on Ed's point earlier, yes, so each province administers its own healthcare system, and so that does, so it's not only in healthcare, but other also areas, sort of for environmental laws. Each province will have different kinds of environmental laws. So if you're operating across jurisdictions, that, you know, can be a challenge to kind of, there's not necessarily much harmonization. But I do think that there's an effort to share lessons and best practices. Every once in a while, the premiers, so the leaders of all the provinces and territories, get together to talk about issues. And e-health or healthcare generally is quite an important topic. And they do have, you know, statements and papers and things to kind of say we should work together more closely. I think no need to kind of reinvent the wheel where a province or another jurisdiction is doing something well, that we can learn from those. And so I think those are kinds of important leadership initiatives. And also having standards is important, as Michael mentioned, implementing standardized documentation procedures, and those will be sort of transferable between systems, and that will ease the administration. So apart from the regulatory context, I think all of those factors are quite important. So a quite massive undertaking. It always amazes me how much, the great efforts of InfoWay, health networks.
Before I turn to the audience to allow for questions, Michael, like your organization is really pushing for information and for this set of change of mindsets. But if you work now, you mentioned you work on a new strategic plan. Like according, who will be your first target? Is it changing the mindsets of the people, of the medical staff, of all these intermediary organizations involved in the health system? I mean, there's so many players. Where do you start?
Yeah, I think that's always going to be a difficult choice. What we're trying to do in our new strategy is to really look at areas that are going to impact on the patient experience. And, I think that a lot of people always say they want to be patient-centric. But the key thing is, how can you really make that happen? And so what we're trying to do, as I mentioned earlier, that we put a lot of investment in putting in the building blocks, but the kind of result of those are not necessarily evident yet to all of the Canadians who are using the system. And so we have done a lot of work kind of doing some, certainly surveying the population, patients, consumers, and so on. And our focus is really going to be looking at specific areas that will make that journey better. And as an example, at the same time, sustainable, because earlier presentation mentioned that in Canada we spend over 11% of GDP on health, and so we're spending more than the average, but the results are not as good as the average. And so there isn't an appetite to spend more money, but there is an appetite to bring care, for example, into lower cost settings, like care in the home. And so what we're trying to do is look at some of those key areas together with partners such as OTN, where we can run pilot programs and then scale those out, and in specific areas like diabetes, congestive heart failure, and so on, where we can try and treat patients more effectively in their own environments. And so it's a constant area or battle where you've got to really focus on what you want to achieve. And I think there's a number of different actions that have to be taken with all the various levels of stakeholders in this process. I think what we're trying to do is make sure that what we're doing is more kind of action orientated, and hopefully we'll come up with a good strategy so that we can help proliferate personal health records. And also we talked about, for example, in British Columbia, patients now have access to their lab test results, and this is something we're trying to extend. It's just started in Ontario, and that's an example of giving people the ability to take more control of their own health.
Thank you. I have a first question here in Berlin. If you could come to the stage, please.
Yeah, hello. Chris Begley from the embassy here. So first of all, I'd like to say thank you again. We're very happy. Es freut uns sehr, Ihnen zu willkommen hier in der Botschaft. So my question is, we've had two panels now. The first one was on entrepreneurship and startups, the second one on regulatory. How are you on the regulatory side working to bring in entrepreneurs, startups, this culture that's pushing for change? Because we hear a lot about strategy and plans, but nothing about companies or entrepreneur spirit.
Thank you. Whoever would like to answer first.
Okay, I'll start because we're actually working quite aggressively in that area. So one of the big shifts for OTN as an organization is that we had to provide services. So one time we thought Cisco told us we had the largest IP video conferencing network in the world. That doesn't seem so important anymore because there's other small networks like Skype and FaceTime and things like that you've heard of that do that now. And so we actually want to mainly get out of the service provision industry and leverage the new technologies, be it, we call it being a steward, finding technologies that don't necessarily, aren't the flashiest technologies, but the ones that have real results that the health system can use to change patient outcomes, to create patient-centered care that providers are willing to use. So we are setting up a structure to try to find those, to try to test those quickly, and then if they work, to scale them. If they don't work, throw them away as fast as we can. If they do work, look at ways to scale them. And that requires a whole bunch of steps. So we're building the evaluation framework to do that. We're building the partnerships to do that. And the last piece is really how do we procure them? That's a big problem in the public sector. As a not-for-profit, though, we can procure things that other public sector organizations can leverage without having to do it again. So we're looking at really creative ways to actually procure technologies and make them available across the healthcare system. And we think through that there'll be well-established solutions and also a lot of relatively new startups that can enter the fray as well.
Thank you. And I mean, there's a lot of... Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Michael Green. So I was going to say that, we recognize as well that there's a lot of economic benefits that come from the funding and the investments we make. And the 2.1 billion, a lot of that money has gone to the industry, so the industrial sector. We also recognize that some of the new technologies, when you're talking about consumer-type technologies, the way that we procure, as Ed mentioned, the way that the governments are set up is more for delivering institutional solutions. And so we're trying to help foster that innovation by work. Every province has their own kind of incubators, startup groups. Mars is one that Zaina Kayat was on from Ontario. So we're trying to work together with the provinces, also with those groups and other agencies, to try and encourage that development to go through. We also reserve a certain amount of our funding we put into challenges and kind of competitions, and so that we basically put out challenges where entrepreneurs and providers can come up with innovative programs and compete for funding to pilot those programs in the field, and we try and support those pilot programs.
And I mean, in the US, Mark Andreessen, the author of Software is Eating the World and one of the world's biggest venture capitalists, I mean, he just invested $200 million in software companies working in biology and healthcare. And how you're so much closer to the US, also in the way you do business, like how will the Silicon Valley approach to innovation get part of your e-health strategies and work, and also the same here for Germany in a second bit?
Yeah, I mean, I can answer first. I think one of the things is that we're on the doorstep of the US, but also the US market is 10 times bigger than the Canadian one. And so that presents some advantages to Canadian players because they have a very close export market for their systems. Canada tends to be a more conservative environment in terms of investing than the US. We don't have the infrastructure of kind of venture capital going into this area at the moment. But there are a lot of efforts to try and stimulate that development, and certainly we're trying to encourage that as well. I think we're still in the early days, but we need to create a more conducive environment for risk-taking and also make it easier for small companies to deal with a very complex public sector health system.
Yep, I agree. Also, I think our problem actually is not invention. Our problem is actually innovation. So I think Zaina said it pretty well this morning. We have a ton of technology available right now that we're not really leveraging across the healthcare system. So new things are always welcome, but I think our biggest challenge is innovation, which is really about a new business process that scales. So how do we use the technology that we know is pretty good and actually have it make a difference in the way we deliver healthcare and really get that disruption, those benefits that we're looking for? And I think that's a bigger challenge than new technology right now.
Thank you. Tony, do you see any questions from the audience in Toronto?
Yes, I see a question from Dr. Matthias Mück. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I would have a question which is relating to a couple of things that have been mentioned during the discussion. I understand from... Is that better now? Yeah. Okay. Yes. I understand that on a provincial level or in Canada, you have different health systems and also different telemedicine systems on provincial levels. There is definitely a challenge to actually treat patients across provincial borders. Can you actually do this as OTN, that you treat patients outside of Ontario, technically? And also, are there some regulatory restrictions or things that you need to consider when you're treating a patient, for example, in British Columbia?
Yeah, technically there isn't a problem. So the primary mode of telemedicine traditionally has been video conferencing. The standards are there. We can connect pretty much with anybody through various gateways, IP gateways, even dial-up gateways if we have to. So the technology's there. And it does happen every day. For example, just down the road here, University Health Network has one of the only lung transplant centers in the country. Their patients come from all over the country. They see them regularly in follow-up, so the patients don't have to fly back. Different provinces do have different regulations. I can't remember them all, but I can tell you the doctors mostly, kind of have a little process, or sometimes, they ignore them. Because it's really about the patient care, and it's not a big deal. But each province does have a bit of a different regulation set. It's a much huger problem in the U.S. because you do need to have a license in pretty much every state when you practice, and a lot of those states are pretty close together. There's one company down in the U.S. That says they employ almost over 200 people who just maintain the licenses of all their physicians who have to do cross-border care all the time. So it is a lot easier here in Canada to do that.
Thank you.
Now I would like you to ask a follow-on question. Are you the exclusive provider of a telemedicine network in Ontario, in the sense that if a hospital or healthcare center would like to provide telemedicine services, that they have to go through you because you offer secure lines or these kind of
No, we're not.
Things?
You can do whatever you want. There's no laws. And there's stuff we certainly don't provide. The one thing, though, is that if physicians want to bill their health insurance system for the work that they do in telemedicine, then they do have to use an OTN certified technology.
We have a question here in Berlin. And if you say who you are.
Hello, greetings from Berlin. So I'm Nana Bita-Regim, Stiftung Charité Berlin. My question is just from the prospect of patients. Knowing that, several geographical challenges in Canada, a big country with I just checked it, I just Googled 35 million population. Do you think is it any need to provide coast-to-coast electronic health care record system, which will just cover the whole country, and that would be probably a specific help and to transform I'm talking about the transformation of delivering healthcare system. The same question would be to my German colleagues. So we have a long-term traditions of telemedicine. So whether it is November 20th, 2015 is a particular time point where we can just not just talk about, but probably implement this opportunity to provide all patients with the electronic healthcare records. Thank you.
Thank you. Hans-Jochen, would you like to start?
Yes. First of all, as far as I can see, in Germany, patients don't object to telemedical applications. On the other side, they have little influence on developments in the healthcare system because in Germany patients are not well organized. And in some of the patient issues are taken up by the consumer protection organizations, and there are some specialized patients organizations like Patients with Diabetes are organized in a diabetes organization, and they are rather influential, but only in their own area. I think if we would have powerful patient organizations in Germany, we would have more innovations, not only telemedical innovations, but other innovations as well. And that's a problem we have. One general remark, probably I have sounded rather pessimistic with what I have described about the German situation. But personally, I'm very optimistic. I think because of the long-term trends which I've mentioned, we will have major breakthroughs in the area of telemedicine in the next 5 years. If you would have asked me, let's say 3 or 4 years ago, I would have told you, ask me in 15, 20 years, if I'm still alive at that time. But the process is progressing and picking up speed in Germany. And especially because of the demographic situation, we have to overcome problems in our healthcare system. And as I mentioned, all across the political parties, there is no difference between CDU, SPD, Grüne, Linke. All parties and the government are pushing for innovations in healthcare, especially in the direction of telemedicine.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, the German Minister of Health, he's quite drastic about it. I mean, it's really sort of, he's warning all organizations hindering further progress by saying, we're gonna just cut your budgets if you don't get on the train right now. And he's just sort of speaks publicly out like that, and I found that very interesting. But giving the question on to our panel in Toronto, who would like to take it?
Yes, I'd just say a couple of words. That the original goal for Infoway was to have a pan-Canadian health record so that someone in the East could travel to the West and their health record would travel with them. And but I think in the end it became apparent that first, before you do that, you want to be able to do it within your own location. And so basically the focus has been mainly on the provinces and territories, making sure they can actually do that within Ontario, that you have that interoperability. And we're getting to the stage where now I think that does exist. And then also, let's face it, 99% of healthcare is done in your own region. So the key benefits are going to be get from regional cooperation with different healthcare providers. However, in the end, you know, I think organizations such as Infoway, what we can try and do is make sure that when we're involved in our investments and also in the areas that we're involved in terms of thought leadership and different kind of groups, that we try and make sure the standards are kind of used in a consistent way so it will be and is possible for kind of cross-country coordination.
Thank you.
And just to build on that, yeah, just outside of actual, the implementation of systems within your region and province, politically, it's very difficult in Canada because the provinces and the federal government often, especially where there's shared jurisdiction, it's a bit of a push and pull about who's control what. And the provinces like to be in control of their healthcare budgets, of their processes. Each provincial government will have slightly different priorities, and so they don't like to be told what to do. And in other areas of law, such as securities law or environmental regulations or things like that, it's very difficult to have just a national, provinces can coordinate and work towards a common goal, but they're going to do it in their own way, and each region will be different. Each region has a different population makeup and demographics and pressures Newfoundland and Labrador will have different, demographic situation than in Alberta or in Saskatchewan. So I think just apart from the actual technically maybe possible and maybe you can get buy-in for harmonized sort of systems, but at the end of the day, politically, the provinces will be very loath to give up any kind of jurisdiction.
Yeah, I guess, who doesn't love a national vision? Canada was built by the railway from coast to coast. Otherwise British Columbia would be part of Russia today, probably. So it is important, but as both folks said here, healthcare is very local. There's no brand like BMW or SAP that does healthcare. But I think the twist on that is that healthcare is becoming more and more retail-oriented. We're seeing that, there was a study recently that of the Fortune 50 companies, something like almost half of them have healthcare strategies. And these are folks who aren't normally in healthcare, like the JP Morgans of the world, or even Ford building, healthcare apps for their cars. So as that retail piece starts to spread out, I think we will start to see national brands, but I don't think it'll be driven by us folks who are in the public sector type space. I think it'll be driven by the private sector and their retail brands that are already existing.
Yeah, in the preparation, I always had also thinking of our last year topic of startups. I also had the impression that the whole startup sector is giving such a pressure on the health market now because they come up all the time with new ideas, new techniques, and by patient groups they are used like for diabetes and so on. And I must tell you this because our German Minister for Health, he said, we have the Porsche in the garage concerning techniques, and now I want everybody to get on the Autobahn. So I was wondering all the time, do you already have our Autobahn concerning health in Canada? Would you say you're really like building the right routes so that all the new techniques can jump on? No?
Maybe we made it sound too rosy here. Because, I mean, the problem we have is our healthcare system is perfectly structured for the 20th century. You heard that from Zaina this morning, the fact that we have a great acute care system, but we haven't really organized ourselves to really bring care where it's needed most to the home. And that's the next change we have to do, and that's where, as you heard this morning, 80% of our healthcare costs are at the moment. So I think we have structural changes to make, we have transformation to make. I think the really exciting thing, though, is that these technologies are going to be the engines that are going to support that transformation, and we need to marry the technology know-how with the political will to make the sort of changes we need to get that Autobahn happening in Canada.
Hans-Jochen wanted to add something to that.
Picking up the image of Autobahn in Germany in the area of healthcare, I think we need at least two additional decisions. First of all, in order to drive on an Autobahn, you need a driver's permit. And for example, at least in Germany, medical doctors, nurses don't hear anything about modern information technologies in medicine during their studies. And so in a certain way, it would help a lot to teach young or future doctors and nurses how to use modern information technologies to deliver innovative modern services. Second problem, in order to drive on an Autobahn, we have to do away with an interdiction to drive on an Autobahn, the Fernbehandlungsverbot, the interdiction to treat a patient remotely. I mentioned already during my presentation that this is not an absolute interdiction in Germany, but in political discussions, many medical doctors and their organizations think there is still an absolute interdiction. For example, very often they argue, I would like to use telemedicine, but I'm forbidden to do so. The Federal Chamber of Medical Doctors in Germany voted a change in the professional law in 2010, changing the absolute interdiction to a relative interdiction. As I mentioned, the doctor is forbidden to treat a patient exclusively at distance, meaning that he has to see him once in a while, personally. But in the political decisions, very often, representatives from medical professions, but also other organizations, are arguing with the interdiction to drive on the Autobahn as if it were an absolute interdiction.
Thank you. All right. I'm going to ask Tony if there are more questions in Toronto.
Yes, we have one more question.
All right. And then I'm going to wrap up.
Yeah, this is Matthias Möck again. I would like to comment the last statement from Professor Browns about the fact that you can't treat patients remotely. This reminded me of a discussion we had with the Kids Hospital in preparation for this conference, and they showed us their telemedicine infrastructure that they're using for decades now. And they also pointed out that they're using the service as an export article. So they are treating patients in the Middle East, if I remember correctly, out of Canada. So I'm just wondering if Germany is missing an opportunity to export their medical expertise in the sense outside of Germany by the fact that we have this law that is prohibiting doctors to treat patients over a longer distance.
I think, like smartphones or any other modern devices, telemedicine doesn't know any borders, and it's a contribution to internationalization. For example, a lot of patients are coming from Arab countries and from Russian-speaking countries to Germany because of the quality of the medical services and are paying a lot of money for it. It would be very helpful, for example, to have something like telemedical representative offices of German hospital, let's say in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, in Moscow, in St. Petersburg, where German medical doctors, through telemedical devices, could participate in the diagnosis of a patient. So if they come here, the German doctor has already precise diagnosis. Very often, patients are coming with diagnoses which are not correct. And all of a sudden, the treatment becomes much more expensive. And there's another personal human aspect. If you come here to Germany as a patient, let's say from Abu Dhabi, Dubai, from Moscow, you have your first personal contact with a medical doctor here. And if you don't like him, if you don't trust him, you have great difficulties to say, no, I don't want to be treated by you. I would rather prefer to return or look for another doctor, because you have paid, you have taken the decision without being able to build up a personal relation with the doctor. And these telemedical representative offices would allow a contact between the treating doctor and the patient while the patient is still at home. And there he can decide, I rather will not come to Berlin.
Thank you. I'm sure the hotel industry wouldn't like your idea so much. The hotel industry wouldn't like your idea so much because we, at least in Hamburg and Munich, it makes a lot of business. All right, I would like to close that session by a last question into the round. You're all working on the idea of making e-health and telemedicine work. So when will we have our system transformed that we don't have to discuss it anymore, but that it's taking place? So from each of your prediction, Hans-Jochen, when do you think? You said before 15 years, now it was already 3 years?
Well, if I understand correctly, I mentioned already, I think we'll have major breakthroughs within the next 3 to 5 years. And because another brief remark before I come back to the question, I think we have to be aware that telemedicine is an issue of the medical profession, and it's not primarily a technological aspect. And in Germany, up till now, the discussion about telemedicine is technology-driven and not healthcare-driven. And we have to change that, and it's changing.
Thank you. Selina, when do you think what you work now as a strategy and implementation will be a regular system as such, with all the mindsets included?
Wow, that's a big question. I'd say probably significant progress, 10 years, I would say, optimistically.
Optimistic, but that's a good number. Michael, Ed, any predictions from your side?
I'd like to be more optimistic. And I think there'll be significant adoption in the next 5 years. And I think one of the driving factors is certainly the consumerization that Ed mentioned, that now we're beginning to get big companies involved, consumer companies involved. And once that happens, then I think that the pressure will increase as people these apps become more available and more accessible. So I think within the next 5 years, we won't be totally there, but I think we'll be in a very different space.
Thank you.
Yeah, humans to be linear thinkers, but I think we're actually sitting on an exponential growth curve now. We're at the bottom of the hockey stick, if you will, right now. And so I will predict that within 3 years, 50% of all healthcare transactions will be virtual.
All right.
We won't be calling it virtual healthcare anymore. It'll just be healthcare, because most of it will, in fact, be virtual.
Right. Thank you very much. And thank you very much to all the panelists, Hans-Jochen, Selina, Michael, Ed. Big applause to you. Thank you. Actually, preparing this, I thought it's crazy. You can't talk about the political regulations in the health business as such in 45 minutes. But I think we made quite some progress here, and at least I learned a lot. I hope all of you did as well. And for my part, that would be already all for today. I really want to thank you all for being here and actively discussing with us, bearing with us for our technical tryouts in the beginning. But I suddenly feel that what I use at the moment for fun and work, like my iPad, my little smartphone and so on, just for fun and leisure and of course for work, someday will, or sooner, let's say between 5 or 10 years, will be the guardian of my health, and I definitely probably will stop smoking by then. All right. Before handing now over to Christina and Jurian for the conclusions of the day, just some logistics. Once we have closed it here, there will be lunch in Toronto and a reception here in Berlin. The Hertie Foundation here in Berlin is just a 10 minutes walk, and I'm sure there are some volunteers showing the way for those not knowing it. And I just want to thank everybody over there in Toronto. It was great to have you here on our screen and talking to you. And I want to thank all my guests, and I want to thank the organizers of this session. And handing now over to Christina and Jurian. And thank you, Tony, for being my good second voice over there in Toronto. Okay, thank you very much.
Well, I think we can all agree that we had some very interesting talks and presentations today. Certainly for me, I'm leading up to the conference, I've been reading a lot about e-health. I'm not from the e-health sector, I'm actually from the aerospace sector. Thinking about that, perhaps John Ross should have a talk with him because I might have a new customer segment for him. If you think about the astronauts on board the International Space Station, that could be an interesting customer segment for you. And think how difficult it will be to do a medevac with the astronauts. So the question was, how e-healthy are Germany and Canada? And I think we got some answers today. There's many aspects to it. There's the political side, the governmental side. I see a lot of efforts there. The government is setting up frameworks where they define the infrastructure needed for e-health, so the physical infrastructure and connectivity. We see the governments trying to set up standards. Think about the electronic health record. It's important to have a common standard there. And the government is also defining legal standards. So think about privacy, data protection, but also think about cross-border telemedicine. So e-health for the government can be seen as a health promoter towards the public, and it can also be seen as a cost saver. I think I looked up some numbers, but I must have got them a little bit wrong. I think Selina said 12% in Germany, 12% of the public spending goes to, government spending goes to healthcare. I had it at 19, but I'm sure I'm wrong. It's the second biggest source of expenditure for the government. So that shows there's some saving to be done there. Then from the technological and economic point of view, I got the feeling that the commercial market is stepping in now and is starting to push developments. We had a very, very interesting trip to the Charité where they showed us a project. It started with kidney disease patients. They set up this project together with SAP and an insurance company, AOK, and a lot more other companies that I actually forgot. It seems like a very comprehensive program where they're setting up an infrastructure for the patient to contribute his data, for all healthcare providers around the patient to enter their data into the system. And when I was listening to them doing their presentation, I was thinking, why not blow this up and make this the model for Germany? It was a very nice presentation. Then we see apps and software being introduced every month, new apps, especially Ampera. I mean, today was a very nice presentation on their diabetes app, and yeah, we learned a lot there. There is a part of technology that we haven't talked too much about. I think it's portable medical devices or medical devices with connectivity. I got a personal favorite there. I was reading about a portable ultrasound device that you can connect into your tablet. Just think about the possibilities there. I mean, take this device to remote areas or take this to places like Africa. I mean, just think about the potential there. And then we have a final category, remote patient monitoring, and we had a very nice presentation on that from John Ross. So coming to the last part, the social part, I mean, that's what e-health is all about and healthcare is all about, the general public. And there I see a couple groups. I mean, there's the group of people that are deprived of healthcare. I mean, think about the possibilities of e-health there. And there's the people like in Germany and Canada. I mean, we're very privileged. We have the chance of receiving healthcare, but still, e-health promises you the possibility of getting involved, whether you're sick or not. I think the time is right. I mean, the other day I was reading a story in Die Welt, a Zeitung, newspaper, that apparently on average people are spending three hours a day using their smartphone. And with young people, that is once every 7 minutes they grab their smartphones And just think about what are the I mean, if they would spend just a percentage of that, spending that on healthcare apps and on their own personal health, I mean, think about the changes there. But also think about yourself. I mean, how often do you grab your smartphone and compare that against how often you do a blood pressure check or a medical checkup? I think there's a lot of potential there, and once we realize it, it's gonna take off, I think. Over to you.
Thank you, Julian. Yes, my name is Christina Arendt from the Canada Meets Germany Network Association, and on behalf of my fellow board members, Dr. Matthias Mück, who's in Toronto right now, and Gerd Hoher, I'd like to thank you all for coming. I'd like to thank Ambassador Gervais Vidriquet for having us here at the embassy, and Botschafter Pnent, thank you very much for your support in Toronto and Ottawa. Thank you to all our speakers and panelists for joining on this journey in e-health, and thank you to our co-organizers, actually. Julian de Bruyne, he's actually the core of the subject. He suggested the subject e-health for this year. So thank you, Julian. And thank you also to Hannes Weiland, who I did see, who I don't see right now. Oh, there he is. Thank you, Hannes. Actually, Hannes and Julian were participants of the GCC last year, and they jumped on the organization team and supported us for organizing or in organizing the GCC this year. So thank you, Julian. Thank you, Hannes. And last, but certainly not least, thank you, Alex, for moderating the GCC for the second time in a row. Thank you very much. You are not a newbie in e-health anymore, I can tell you. So thank you very much, Alex. Thank you, Tony, for supporting Alex in Toronto. Thank you. And thank you again for coming. And Toronto, enjoy your lunch, enjoy your field trips, and Berlin, enjoy the reception at the Hertie Foundation. Thank you.